Huo Yuhao sighed and said, "Perhaps returning was a mistake. Not only did we fail to restrain the Sun Moon Empire's main army, we were instead pinned down in Shrek City by them, and we can no longer pose a threat to the Sun Moon Empire's homeland. In that case, all our original strategic plans have come to nothing. Moreover, Wutong is right. I believe that with Juzi's intelligence, she would never place the main target of attack on Shrek City. A siege battle, or even attacking a heavily fortified city fully supported by both empires and forcing the Academy into a desperate fight. This is not something the Sun Moon Empire should be doing right now." "Sorry, Yuhao. I shouldn't have said that. If you were the one analyzing it, you might have been able to convince the senior elders." Tang Wutong lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong. Huo Yuhao took her hand and shook his head. "It's not your fault. Even if I said it myself, the outcome wouldn't change. Juzi is truly formidable. This move of hers is an open scheme that forces the Academy into self-rescue. No one dares to gamble with the Academy's safety. That is her most brilliant point. She really is terrifyingly capable." Bei said, "But we can't just go on like this. We must find a way to respond. Otherwise this time we're in real danger." Huo Yuhao nodded. "All right then. Wutong, you return to the Academy and inquire within the inner court about Star Luo Empire's current deployments, and see where the White Tiger Duke and the main forces of the Star Luo Empire are stationed. Senior brother will first return to treat Teacher Ye. Then I'll go find the White Tiger Duke and explain the situation to him, so he understands the importance of safety. As for the Douluo Empire side, I'll go after returning from Star Luo Empire. We only know Heavenly Sun Douluo there, so we can only ask that elder for help and see if we can persuade Douluo Empire not to send too many main forces either." Thousands of years ago, it was under the Academy's leadership that the combined power of the three great empires defeated the main forces of the Sun Moon Empire, forcing them into retreat and laying the foundation for thousands of years of peace. The only fear now is that Star Luo and Douluo still hold the same belief. If that's the case, they will inevitably go all out, and then things will become troublesome. We are already at a disadvantage now and can only respond passively." As he said this, Huo Yuhao couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness in his heart. He realized that his own strength was still too small. With his personal power alone, he simply could not change the current situation. He had originally thought that the sabotage within the Sun Moon Empire would have achieved good results. But who could have expected that on the front lines, Juzi's command of the Sun Moon Empire's army was even more incisive, to the point where he was now somewhat at a loss. "Still not strong enough. Yuhao," Tang Wutong suddenly called him. Huo Yuhao turned to look at her. Tang Wutong stepped forward and stood in front of him. She was not much shorter than Huo Yuhao, and the two were almost eye to eye. She looked at him intently and said, "Don't lose confidence." Huo Yuhao's heart tightened, instantly understanding her meaning, and he nodded slightly. Tang Wutong said, "Back then, when the teacher passed on his legacy to us, it was because he hoped we would become the backbone of the Academy in the future to protect and develop it. We cannot let him down." Yuhao, do you feel that individual strength is too insignificant? That facing the Sun Moon Empire's overwhelming army, personal power can no longer change the situation of this war, and even feels somewhat powerless against it? Huo Yuhao looked at her in surprise. "Wutong, we really are in sync. I did have that exact thought just now." Tang Wutong said solemnly, "That's right. Individual strength is indeed very small in the face of the collective. However, when personal strength reaches a certain level, it is not impossible to influence the entire battlefield. Others may not be able to, but you can. Don't forget, you are the only ultimate soldier cultivated by Shrek Academy. Moreover, you are never fighting alone. You have me, you have seen your brother, and you have the partners of the Tang sect behind you. Behind you stands the entire Shrek Academy. So no matter when, you must not lose heart. You possess unique abilities, dual martial souls, and the undead demiplane. If there is anyone who can turn the tide, it is only you. However, both you and I are still not strong enough. We must become stronger to truly become the leaders of this war. Bei looked at Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong with a smile. Wutong is right. No matter when, we must not lose heart. Even if we ultimately fail, so what? At least we gave it our all without regrets. Huo Yuhao fell silent. His heart had indeed been in turmoil just moments ago, and Tang Wutong's words were like a thunderclap that awakened him from the chaos. Seeing him deep in thought, Tang Wutong said nothing more. She walked back to his side, took his hand, and silently offered him support through the warmth of her palm. Huo Yuhao thought to himself, Juzi, Juzi, you've really given me an enormous problem. How to break this situation is crucial. Once I make the wrong move, the next step could very well mean total defeat. Sometimes conspiracies are easier to deal with. It is precisely this kind of open scheme, an overt plot that suppresses others with sheer momentum, that is the hardest to handle. To break the situation, one must win by unexpected means. Personal strength, the ultimate soldier? Suddenly, Huo Yuhao recalled what Tang Wutong had just said, as if a bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Then he suddenly remembered something his mother had said before she died. Yuhao, the road ahead can only be walked by yourself. Mother can no longer accompany you. Remember this. In this world, the only person you can fully trust and completely rely on is yourself. Only by becoming strong yourself can you do what you want to do and protect what you need to protect. Only yourself. Boom. The confusion in Huo Yuhao's mind shattered instantly, and the intense spiritual fluctuation triggered violent disturbances above his head. The clouds in the sky were instantly dispersed, and the weather became clear once again. Taking a deep breath, light flashed in Huo Yuhao's eyes as he said in a low voice, Senior brother, Wutong, we cannot be in disarray at a time like this. We'll proceed as I just said. Wutong, return to the academy and find out the deployments on the Star Luo Empire side. You must locate where the White Tiger Duke is stationed. Senior brother, I'll trouble you to make a personal trip to meet the White Tiger Duke. Tell him my deduction and the situation here, and make sure he restrains himself. Do not send all his main forces here. Instead, organize an elite corps and be ready to act at any time. Wutong, go to the Spirit Do Empire. You're the only one besides me who knows Heavenly Son Douluo. Find him and tell him the situation as well. Say the same thing I told Senior Brother to tell the White Tiger Duke. If my guess is correct, Juzi's real target is likely the Spirit Do Empire. Because the Spirit Do Empire is the weakest, sometimes the simplest inference is the correct one, because it is a reversal of a reversal. Tang Wutong asked, what about you? Huo Yuhao pulled her into his arms and stroked her long pinkish blue hair. I'll first heal Teacher Ya, then immediately go into seclusion to break through to Title Douluo. You're right. If individual power can change the course of the war, then that person can only be me. Only I have the ability to infiltrate the enemy camp. As this ultimate soldier, I must push myself to the absolute limit. Tang Wutong fell silent for a moment, then nodded forcefully. She turned and ran straight toward the academy. She understood the danger of Huo Yuhao's breakthrough, but she also knew this was the best choice right now. Once his second soul core broke through, he would be far more than an ordinary Title Douluo. Bei looked at Huo Yuhao with a complicated expression. Yuhao, you... Huo Yuhao raised his hand, stopping Bei from continuing, and smiled brightly. Senior brother, a real man must step forward when it's time. Let me have a proper contest with Juzi. She uses open schemes, and I'll use open schemes too. Let's see who will have the final victory. Back at the Tang sect, everyone else was busy, and only one person sat in the hall. Tangya's face was still pale. Sitting there, she looked like a delicate lily that inspired pity. Seeing her state, not only Bei, but even Huo Yuhao felt a pang in his heart. He still clearly remembered his lively and adorable Teacher Ya from before. However, at this moment, Tang Ya's face carried an unhidden excitement. Sitting there, she clenched the hem of her clothes, nervously waiting. Teacher Ya. Huo Yuhao walked quickly into the hall, while Bei lagged slightly behind him, his lips tightly pressed together, and tears faintly glimmering in his eyes. It had been years, although Tang had been rescued. How could Bei Bei not see that she had never truly been happy? Her unhappiness was not because of her poor health, but because even as the Tang sect flourished through everyone's joint efforts, she herself could contribute nothing. That was what caused her pain. Rebuilding the Tang sect had always been her dream. For this dream, she had even chosen to leave Bei Bei back then. This showed just how important it was to her. Yet now, the reconstruction of the Tang sect had already begun and was developing at high speed. But as its sect master, she could do nothing at all. She could only watch everyone busy themselves, watch them risk their lives. To her, the torment in her heart far exceeded any physical pain. With the heaven and earth creation pill and the life-guarding blade provided by Huo Yuhao, Tangya's physical condition was now stable, but she was still just a frail, ordinary girl. And just moments ago, Tangya heard that Huo Yuhao had actually brought back the Blue-Silver Emperor. She finally had hope of recovery. How could she not be overjoyed? Yuhao, thank you. Seeing Huo Yuhao, Tangya stood up, tears already streaming down her face. Huo Yuhao hurriedly said, Teacher Xiaoya, without the shelter you and senior brother once gave me, I wouldn't be who I am today. Saying thanks like this is too formal. I'll start treating you right away. Let's cure you first, all right? As he spoke, his spiritual detection was released, and he easily located the Blue-Silver Emperor within the Tang sect. Bei Bei walked to Tang Ye's side and gently embraced her. At this moment, this refined senior disciple of the Tang sect could not say a single word. His feelings for Tang Ye were so intense. Yet over these years, all the torment he had endured for her had been no less than hers. After waiting so many years, a healthy Tang Ye was finally about to return to his side. How could he not be excited? Shortly after, the Blue-Silver Emperor arrived in the hall. The moment it saw Tang Ye, it knew she was its target. The aura of the blue-silver grass martial soul within Tang Ye had already become extremely weak, yet it still existed. As the sovereign among blue-silver grass, it could naturally sense it clearly. Hello, Blue-Silver Emperor. Bei Bei finally managed to speak. He respectfully bowed to it, and Xiaoya did the same. Huo Yuhao said to the Blue-Silver Emperor, Senior, this is my senior brother, and this is Teacher Xiaoya. I believe you can also see that Teacher Xiaoya's martial soul has been severely damaged, so we need your help. My senior brother has also sworn that as long as he is not attacked by soul beasts, he will never actively hunt them. The Blue-Silver Emperor nodded and said directly, Then let's begin. First heal her injuries. We can talk about other matters later. As it spoke, the Blue-Silver Emperor raised its vine-formed arm and gave a light shake. A crystalline blue vine segment floated out and landed in Huo Yuhao's hand. After searching for so long, failing again and again, even spreading news across the entire continent and offering a heavy reward, the Blue-Silver Emperor that they had been unable to find had finally appeared in the Tang sect. Huo Yuhao turned to Bei Bei and said, Senior brother, let's find a quiet room and begin immediately. Senior Blue-Silver Emperor, will you come as well? Yes, I'll take a look as well. The Blue-Silver Emperor nodded. After all, Xiaoya might become the future host of its spirit soul, so it needed to pay closer attention. Finding a quiet room was easy. In the backyard, they selected one. Bei Bei personally guarded the door. Huo Yuhao treated Tang Ye, and the Blue-Silver Emperor observed from the side. Teacher Xiaoya, please sit cross-legged, then relax your body. After I help awaken your martial soul, try to circulate your soul power. Don't rush. Let's proceed step by step. All right, Tang Ye nodded. How could she not be anxious? Her desire for power now was even greater than before. But she also knew that at this critical moment, she must remain calm. Otherwise, going berserk would be disastrous. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down, and sat cross-legged. Suddenly, the Blue-Silver Emperor raised both hands and made a gentle pressing motion toward Tang Ye. Instantly, a wave of faint blue light drifted down and enveloped her. Strangely enough, although all kinds of healing soul skills have been tried on Tang Ye before without effect, under this blue light, she actually felt an overwhelming sense of physical and mental tranquility. She gratefully glanced at the blue-silver emperor and nodded at it. Huo Yuhao stepped forward, holding that segment of the blue-silver emperor's vine in his hand. Pure mysterious heaven technique, soul, power, slowly poured into it, and the vine immediately radiated a strong blue glow. Tangya's delicate body trembled slightly. She seemed to sense something within her body beginning to stir in response to the aura of the blue-silver emperor vines. In the past, although the heaven and earth creation pill had prevented her life force from continuing to drain away, it had never increased either. But at this moment, she felt a warm, soothing sensation throughout her entire body, as if something within her had truly been awakened. Huo Yuhao increased the infusion of soul power. With a soft pop, that segment of blue-silver emperor vines suddenly shattered, transforming into countless blue light particles that drifted through the air. At this moment, Huo Yuhao's powerful control became evident. Under the guidance of his soul power, those light particles did not disperse at all, but instead spread evenly throughout the surrounding air. A portion quietly merged into Tangya's body through her pores, while another portion entered her through her breathing. Tangya's body began to tremble slightly, and a faint layer of blue light gradually enveloped her. Huo Yuhao let out a slight breath of relief. At least for now, everything seemed normal. As for what came next, it would depend on Tangya herself. The main purpose of these blue-silver emperor vines was to awaken Tangya's own martial soul, the blue-silver grass. Her blue-silver grass martial soul had been extremely weakened after the dark elements within it were stripped away. However, the aura of the blue-silver emperor was powerful enough. Once it awakened her martial soul and restored its vitality, her cultivation would gradually return, and her life force would steadily accumulate. Only then would she be fully recovered. Tangya clenched her teeth tightly. She could feel the power within her body beginning to awaken, but the calling force seemed somewhat weak. Although she could sense it, she still could not use it to guide her original power into motion. She grew increasingly anxious. This opportunity was incredibly rare. If she failed, she truly could not imagine what the outcome would be. The more anxious she became, the more powerless she felt. The energy within her body still could not be drawn out, while the aura and effect of the blue-silver emperor were already beginning to weaken as it continued to merge with her. No, she couldn't fail. Panicking inwardly, Tangya desperately tried to draw upon that power. But in her anxiety, the blue-silver emperor energy entering her body instead began to destabilize. Huo Yuhao was also startled. He had been observing Tangya's condition through spiritual detection the entire time, and now that her internal aura suddenly became chaotic, he also grew anxious. But at this moment, no one could help her. This was the awakening of her own martial soul, something that soul power alone could not accomplish. It was a mysterious resonance within the martial soul itself. At that moment, a blue figure quietly appeared behind Tangya. He raised both arms, and strands of fine vines silently coiled around her body. Immediately after, his entire body burst forth with brilliant blue light as an intense aura spread outward. That was not soul power. It was a bloodline aura originating from a martial soul. The blue-silver emperor. Tangya's body trembled violently once, then gradually stabilized. It could be clearly seen that a small cluster of blue light spread outward from her dantian. Meanwhile, the vines released by the blue-silver emperor flickered in and out of view, their glow extremely mystical. Success! Huo Yuhao looked at Bei Bei beside him in pleasant surprise, and Bei Bei was just the same. They had both been extremely tense. At the critical moment, the blue-silver emperor's intervention played a decisive role. Huo Yuhao could feel that this time, it had truly succeeded. As expected, Tangya's aura gradually stabilized, and her body no longer trembled. Soul power fluctuations unique to her had already begun to emerge within her body. The vines of the blue-silver emperor quietly loosened from her body and returned to Huo Yuhao's side. Her martial soul has been awakened. As expected, she carries the purest lineage of our blue silvergrass. Moreover, within her bloodline, there is also the orthodox royal bloodline of blue silvergrass. Thank you, Huo Yuhao. You've helped me find a very good host. If I can one day merge into a spirit soul like yours, I should be able to help her within her body, and she will also be able to help me. Thank you. Huo Yuhao and Bei both bowed respectfully toward the blue-silver emperor. We should be the ones thanking you. Without your help, things might have become dangerous just now. Tangya's aura finally stabilized completely, and the soul power fluctuations within her body also began to strengthen. Although the increase was not significant, and she was still only at the level of an ordinary soul apprentice, Huo Yuhao could clearly perceive this growth, and, through spiritual sharing, let Bei sense it as well. Looks like Teacher Tang, you will need to go into seclusion for a period of time. After this, once she finishes her cultivation retreat, her soul power should be fully restored. We can nourish her properly afterward. Senior brother, why don't we let third senior brother handle the trip to the Star Luo Empire? You stay here with Teacher Tangya. However, Bei shook his head. Everyone has their own responsibilities. It's better if I go personally. My identity as a member of the Sea God Pavilion will make it easier to gain trust. Yuhao, write me a letter. I'll set off immediately. I'll first go find Nan and Xiao and ask them to help keep watch over Tangya. Bei's fighting spirit at this moment was burning intensely. Tangya had finally recovered, and to him, it felt as if all the gloom in the world had been swept away. As the senior eldest brother of the Tang sect's leader, once his mood brightened, his entire mental state became completely different. Good. Time waits for no one. At this moment, Huo Yuhao could not be polite with Bei either. When Bei went to find Xiao and Jiang Nan, Huo Yuhao had already finished writing his letter. He immediately handed it over to Bei, who did not rest either. He left the Tang sect at once and headed straight for the Star Luo Empire. After giving some instructions to Jiang Nan and Xiao, Huo Yuhao entered the underground area of the Tang sect Soul Tool Hall and went directly to Xian Ziwen's laboratory. Before going into seclusion, there were still some matters he needed to consult his teacher Xian about. Knock, knock. Huo Yuhao lightly tapped twice on the metal door of the laboratory. There was no response from inside. Huo Yuhao was already used to this situation and quietly pushed the door open and entered. As expected, Xian Ziwen was inside, busily crafting a soul tool, not even looking up at him. Teacher Xian, I'm back, Huo Yuhao said softly. I know. I heard you used up nearly 60% of the Tang sect's fixed soul guidance shells in one go. That did happen. Second senior brother betrayed me, Huo Yuhao said helplessly. Xian Ziwen said calmly, soul tools are made to be used. There's no such thing as betrayal. But did you really achieve your goal? Over 10,000 fixed soul guidance shells were used at once. You little wastrel, why didn't you mix in some dummy shells? You knew very well that such an attack couldn't break through Bright Capital's defenses. Huo Yuhao gave a bitter smile. I couldn't think about that at the time. I was extremely nervous. I was wrong, Teacher Xian. Xian Ziwen waved his hand. Our fixed soul guidance shells are still not strong enough. 10,000 plus shells only exhausted their defensive energy, at most overloading Bright Capital's high-energy compressed array soul tools. Not worth it. I made some adjustments recently. Our production will now be categorized. Oh, how are they categorized? Huo Yuhao asked curiously. Xian Ziwen said, previously, all mass-produced fixed soul guidance shells were mainly explosive types, using high temperature, intense heat, and blast force for destruction. Because of this, almost all soul guidance shields are now designed to counter that kind of attack, especially linked defense shields. Kai-Tu just came to report your battle. The effect of Tai-A exceeded my expectations. Tai-A was the 9th level fixed soul guidance shell that penetrated the Sun Moon Empire Imperial Palace defenses, personally developed by Xian Ziwen. So, I've decided that in future production of fixed soul guidance shells, we should diversify types. We need area of effect shells and also piercing type shells. In many cases, piercing attacks are actually more effective. Recently, I developed a new type called the mother and child piercing shell. It costs about twice as much as the one you researched because it requires rare metals. But its destructive power, it's already in accelerated production. If you go out on operations again, you can take some with you. Huo Yuhao said, "For now, I'm afraid we can't leave. The situation isn't looking good, and I have a new plan." Xianxia raised his hand to stop him. "Don't tell me about outside affairs. As long as the Tang sect exists, I will not leave here. I only care about my own research. The rest is up to you. You've already become a 9th-rank soul master, so I have nothing more to teach you. Go and rely on your own efforts. I've also heard about the mass production of humanoid soul tools over there. That may not necessarily be a good thing. Let me think it through first. Once I've sorted it out, I'll tell you. With current soul tool technology, even Xun'er may not be able to create humanoid soul tools without side effects." "Xun'er? Who is that?" Huo Yuhao asked in confusion. Xianxia glanced at him. "He is my teacher, the Hall Master of the Sun Moon Empire Royal Enshrine Hall, and the most powerful soul engineer in the Sun Moon Empire. Your Grandmaster. There's such a person? Why have I never heard you mention him?" Huo Yuhao said in shock. Xianxia glared at him. "That's because you're foolish. Think about it. At my age, when I was only an 8th-rank soul engineer, could I have become the chief researcher of Mingda Hall without special reasons? I am Xun'er's disciple. Among all 9th-rank soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire, nearly half have received his guidance. Xun'er is extremely formidable. I don't even know his true limits. In any case, he is no less than any limit Douluo and an extremely dangerous existence. In my view, Su Tianran's ascension to the throne was likely also supported by Xun'er. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy." Huo Yuhao's mouth twitched slightly. Although this was his grandmaster ancestor, she was standing on the enemy's side. Having such a powerful figure among the enemy was absolutely not a good thing. "Teacher Xian, I'm going into seclusion now. Please take care of yourself as well," Huo Yuhao said. Xianxia waved his hand, as if shooing away flies. Go on. Don't bother me unless it's something important. Don't worry. Ever since I took your heaven and earth creation pill, it won't be easy for me to die, even if I want to. Sai, you lot are simply shameless profiteers, exploiting my labor." Huo Yuhao looked helpless, thinking to himself, "With your temperament, if you weren't willing, who could possibly exploit you?" After leaving Xianxia's research room, Huo Yuhao returned to his own laboratory. Although he had been away during this period, it was still regularly cleaned, and the room was spotless. He closed the heavy iron door, locked it from the inside, and activated the warning system. Anyone approaching would receive a notice that he was in seclusion for research. This was a core strategic area of the Tang sect, extremely quiet and secure. Huo Yuhao walked around his laboratory, sorted out his thoughts, then leapt up onto the soul tool crafting platform and sat down cross-legged. For now, the overall situation can only be left to develop as it is. Until a real outcome appears, the Academy's senior elders will not change their strategy. As for the Douluo Empire and the Star Luo Empire, I've already done what I can. Now it depends on their own decisions. What I need to do is become as strong as possible so that at the critical moment, I can turn the tide of battle. I can do it. I definitely can. After murmuring this to himself, Huo Yuhao clenched his fists. His eyes slowly closed, and his body relaxed as his soul power began to circulate naturally. When Tang Wutong mentioned the ultimate single soldier plan earlier, Huo Yuhao had already understood her meaning. His soul power had been stuck at level 89 for a long time, never breaking through to become a Title Douluo. In terms of strength, an ordinary Title Douluo was no match for him. But for any soul master, becoming a Title Douluo brings a massive leap in power. The higher the talent, the greater the improvement. Moreover, Huo Yuhao already possessed his first soul core. Once his second soul core was successfully condensed, the essence of his soul power would be no different from a limit Douluo, and his future growth rate would become unimaginably fast. During this period, Huo Yuhao had actually been accumulating for a long time. After obtaining the 8th soul ring of his spirit eyes, martial soul deep in the ice sea, as well as his 6th spirit soul, the mermaid princess, his spiritual sea underwent another qualitative transformation, and his spiritual power surged dramatically. Later, influenced by plant life, he comprehended the deeper microscopic realm. Now, he truly possessed the qualifications to attempt forming his 2nd soul core. At least in terms of spiritual control, he was no weaker than any level 98 soul master. Only by becoming stronger could he gain more say and the ability to change the battlefield. That was what Huo Yuhao had come to realize. Individual strength may be small, but at certain moments, it can still change the overall situation. If it cannot now, then perhaps it will after becoming stronger. Since there was no better solution at the moment, strengthening himself was the best choice. So Huo Yuhao decided to enter seclusion. Moreover, the method of cultivation he intended to use was different from what Tang Wutong had imagined. In Tang Wutong's view, the best approach now was to cultivate his soul core through isotonic resonance. However, Huo Yuhao did not think so. He knew that in the future he would inevitably face beings like beast god Dtion. If he was fundamentally inferior to Dtion, then he would have no chance of victory at all. In this situation, his only option was to walk the same path as Dtion, or even surpass him. With this thought, Huo Yuhao had already made up his mind. His soul power circulated naturally, and at his forehead, the soul core stabilized while his spiritual power also revolved around it. Huo Yuhao's soul core was the center of all his current power. Around it first revolved his spiritual power, while soul power occupied the outer layer. If one observed his spiritual sea, one would find a massive diamond-shaped sun within it. This sun was his soul core. His spiritual power had now become nearly solid in form, still revolving around the soul core. What Huo Yuhao was about to do next was to open his 2nd soul core. According to Elder Xian's explanation, the opening of his 1st soul core had not been easy, but laid the foundation for the relatively easier establishment of the 2nd soul core. This was because the 2nd soul core would be formed within the Dantian, and the Dantian was originally the place where soul power was stored, making it far easier to establish a soul core there than in other locations. However, after this period of accumulation, Huo Yuhao had developed a different idea in his mind. While opening a soul core in the Dantian was indeed good, it might not be the optimal choice for his future development, because what he intended to choose was not the isotopic resonance method, but rather a yin-yang complementary cultivation approach. Yin-yang complementarity meant opposing and reversing forces. The cultivation itself was extremely difficult. If he were to establish his soul core in the Dantian, leaving aside whether it would even succeed, once it did, the 2 soul cores within his body would operate in opposite rotational forces, pulling and complementing each other. From the Dantian all the way to the glabella, both soul power and spiritual power circulated through these regions. Then, when Huo Yuhao's soul power reached level 98 in the future, what would he do? At that time, he might already possess strength comparable to a limit Douluo, but he still would not truly be a limit Douluo. To break through to level 99, he would need to use soul core breakthroughs as the foundation. In other words, Huo Yuhao would still need to condense a 3rd soul core in the future. If that were the case, and his first 2 soul cores had already occupied the entire space from the Dantian to the glabella under a yin-yang complementary state, then where would his 3rd soul core be formed? Human beings only have 3 possible locations for soul core awakening: the glabella, the chest, and the Dantian. By then, trying to open a 3rd soul core in the chest between 2 existing yin-yang complementary soul cores would be nothing more than wishful thinking. It would require forcibly severing the connection between the 2 soul cores, and doing so would cause Huo Yuhao to explode on the spot. In other words, if Huo Yuhao chose to establish his 2nd soul core in the Dantian, he would lose the possibility of forming a 3rd soul core in the future. No matter how strong he became, he would never reach the level of a limit Douluo. And in that case, he would also be unable to inherit the divine position of the god of emotions. Therefore, Huo Yuhao had long made his decision. He had already determined that his second soul core would not only be formed through the yin-yang complementary method, but would also be established in the chest, leaving the dantian free. In this way, he would still have the possibility of forming a third soul core in the dantian in the future. At that time, the third soul core would likely only have to deal with interference from the soul core in the chest. Ice Empress, are you there? Huo Yuhao called out in his mind. I'm here. Yuhao, what is it? Ice Empress's voice responded. Yuhao said, I'm preparing to begin cultivating my second soul core to break through to the Title Douluo realm. I will be cultivating using the yin-yang complementary method. I'll need your help. I plan to establish the soul core in my chest. I have merged your Ice, Jade, Emperor Scorpion torso bone in my body, and your power is strongest there. Moreover, this second soul core I am condensing will primarily rely on ultimate Ice soul power. I will separate soul power from the first soul core. In that case, once my second soul core is successfully formed, the first soul core will control spiritual power, while the second soul core will control soul power. When the two complement each other, soul power and spiritual power will naturally communicate, forming a fusion of the two. All my soul skills and abilities will then carry both characteristics when used. After hearing Huo Yuhao's words, Ice Empress fell silent for a moment, then let out a soft sigh. Do you realize how difficult this is? Huo Yuhao replied, I don't know exactly how difficult it will be, but no matter what, I have to try. Can you help me? Ice Empress said, Of course I will help you. I must say, you are truly exceptionally talented and remarkably intelligent. The path you have chosen is the most extreme form of cultivation among our ultimate Ice lineage, or even among all cultivators in this world. And it also holds boundless potential. Huo Yuhao did not expect that while Ice Empress did not fully approve of his decision, she would still praise him so highly. Ice Empress continued, Among soul beasts, the truly wise and powerful beings have almost all chosen this path. However, only one has ever succeeded. That is Beast God Tian, which is why he is the strongest soul beast in existence. Huo Yuhao's heart stirred. So you've also cultivated this way before? Ice Empress replied, No, I was not qualified. My strength has not yet reached the level equivalent to your human limit Douluo, so I cannot construct a second spirit ring. But Xun'er has indeed tried it. Snow Empress. Huo Yuhao exclaimed in shock. Snow Empress's voice then sounded, Yes, I've tried it. If I had succeeded, then what would Tian even amount to? At the very least, I would not have been weaker than him. However, I failed. The consequence of that failure was a severe injury to my origin, leaving me forever unable to attempt breaking through the next bottleneck. In the end, I could only choose to transform into an embryo, and ultimately it benefited you. Huo Yuhao did not expect Snow Emperor to have such a tortuous experience. Instead of being shocked, he felt pleasantly surprised. Since Snow Emperor had tried it, it meant she had accumulated some experience. And for him, these experiences were precisely the most valuable thing of all. Snow Emperor said, I have tried it, so I understand even more how difficult this method is. The reason Tian was able to succeed was not because his willpower was much stronger than mine, but because his body, as the golden-eyed Black Dragon King, was strong enough. To complete cultivation through the yin-yang complementary method, separating spiritual power and soul power completely, and then refusing them in mutual complementarity places an extremely enormous burden on the body. Moreover, it also requires exceptionally strong control. With your current spiritual power, you are already sufficient. However, you are ultimately human, and your physical strength is still far inferior to our soul beasts. The reason we soul beasts do not choose the method of isotopic resonance for cultivation is because our body structures make it extremely difficult. Our meridians are different from yours humans, We do not have as well-developed acupoints. We only have 2 positions where we can cultivate soul cores. This is also one of the reasons we are destined not to become gods. And these 2 positions cannot produce resonance, so we can only choose yin-yang complementarity. Yuhao, do you really want to do this? If it fails, the consequences will be very serious. Huo Yuhao did not hesitate at all. He said in a deep, extremely firm voice, "No matter what, I must try. If this succeeds, then we will have laid the foundation for heading to the divine realm. If it fails," he paused slightly, his eyes flashing with cold light. "Unless I die, there will be no failure. Without the courage and spirit to press forward without retreat, how could there be any chance of success when attempting to break into this forbidden zone of humanity?" Snow Emperor and Ice Empress both fell silent. After a moment, Snow Emperor said in an unprecedentedly solemn tone, "All right, then we'll gamble with you. The 6 of us soul spirits will help you together. I refuse to believe we cannot succeed. Yuhao, you just focus on cultivation and don't worry about us. We will go all out and ensure there are no regrets." Huo Yuhao nodded and closed his eyes. He did not begin immediately, but instead adjusted his condition. Only by keeping himself in peak state could he succeed. The more critical the moment, the less he could rush. Streams of light separated from within Huo Yuhao's body. The first to appear were Snow Emperor and Ice Empress. Among the 6 great soul spirits, these 2 were also the most powerful. Octagonal Mysterious Ice Grass, Ice Bear King Xiaobai, Heavenly Dream Ice Silkworm, and Mermaid Princess Leah also appeared one after another. The 6 great soul spirits all surrounded Huo Yuhao. Snow Emperor looked at the other 5 soul spirits and said, "You all heard what Yuhao said just now. This seclusion is extremely important for him, and equally important for us. We exist within Yuhao's body, surviving based on his body. If something happens to him, it means all of us soul spirits will also be affected. And if he succeeds, then it means we all succeed as well. Therefore, this time, I demand that everyone at any cost help him overcome this difficulty. Do not worry about our own consumption. Once Yuhao succeeds, the soul core exchange formed by the yin-yang complementary method will provide us with inexhaustible benefits. Moreover, as he said, once this succeeds, it will truly lay the foundation for us to accompany him in becoming gods in the future. This is also our true goal after becoming soul spirits." The 5 soul spirits all nodded simultaneously. Heavenly Dream Eye Silkworm was especially excited. "Great! I've been waiting for this day for far too long. Yuhao is finally about to take that step. I will fully support him." Snow Emperor glanced at him and said, "Heavenly Dream, I must warn you. Others can go all out, but you don't need to. Last time, when Yuhao had a problem, you already fused your origin with his. This time, restrain yourself a bit. We can handle it." Heavenly Dream Ice Silkworm froze for a moment and looked toward Ice Empress beside him, but Ice Empress turned her head away and did not look at him. Snow Emperor said irritably, "What are you looking at? Binger is just feeling sorry for you, that's all." Heavenly Dream Ice Silkworm's body trembled slightly, but he said nothing and gently nodded. Octagonal Mysterious Ice Grass swayed its large octagonal leaves lightly, conveying its will. Among the 6 soul spirits, it was the weakest. Snow Emperor continued, "This time, when forming the yin-yang complementary soul core, the soul core Yuhao is reconstructing will be of the ultimate ice attribute. In this situation, the power of ultimate ice must be especially strong. Leah, you will be responsible for the spiritual soul core in the sea of spiritual power. What you need to do is assist Yuhao in maintaining stability over there, and if necessary, delay any interference from that side toward us." Leah nodded. Although she had only recently joined them, as the mermaid princess, she possessed intelligence far beyond that of ordinary humans and naturally understood how important this matter was. The Snow Empress continued assigning tasks in a low, solemn voice. "Tianming, you will assist Leah over there. The compatibility between Huo Yuhao's spiritual origin and yours is very high, and yours is also part of his origin, so it will be easier to control. At the same time, you must closely monitor Yuhao's physical condition. Under no circumstances can his body collapse, do you understand? The heavenly dream, Ice, Silkworm nodded. The Snow Empress took the Ice Empress's hand and said, Xun'er will be the main force. The place where Yuhao is forming his soul core this time is in the chest area, which is also where your Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone is located. I will assist you. Xiaobai and Baji will join as well. The four of us are all possessors of ultimate ice energy, and we will do everything we can to help Yuhao condense his soul core. Baji, you are mainly responsible for maintaining stability. Xiaobai, you are responsible for protecting Yuhao's body. The mobilization of soul power will be handed over to Xun'er and me. Yes, the three great ultimate ice spirits responded in unison. In just a few short sentences, the Snow Empress had already arranged everything perfectly. Finally, she looked around at the five great spirit beings. This time, success is the only option. Failure is not allowed. Let's work together as one. Together as one. The five great spirit beings shouted in unison. The Snow Empress came to Huo Yuhao's side and gently patted his shoulder. Thank you, Snow Empress. Huo Yuhao had heard everything the six spirit beings said. He opened his eyes, tears shimmering within them. The Snow Empress smiled faintly. Thank me for what? Your body is no longer yours alone. It belongs to all of us. The seven of us are one. What could possibly be impossible for us? However, before we begin, go retrieve the life guarding blade. The vast life force it contains should be useful to you. Back then, Tian was able to condense his yin-yang complementary second soul core in the life lake filled with life energy. I believe you will need it as well. Huo Yuhao's eyes lit up. That's right. How could he have forgotten this? Teacher Xiao had already begun her recovery, so the life guarding blade was no longer needed by her, but it might play an enormous role for him. Huo Yuhao quickly sprang to his feet, reopened the laboratory door, and ran out to find Tangya. The six spirit beings did not follow. At such a short distance, temporarily separating from Huo Yuhao posed no problem. The Snow Empress leaned close to the Ice Empress's ear and said something. Shock appeared in the Ice Empress's deep blue eyes as she suddenly turned to look at the Snow Empress. Swear you. The Snow Empress smiled faintly, her eyes full of pride. I failed back then, but this time, no matter what, I will help Yuhao succeed. The Ice Empress nodded gently. Snow Empress, I understand. The Snow Empress's pretty face flushed slightly. Understand what? The Ice Empress let out a soft laugh. Understand. I just won't say it. While they were talking, Huo Yuhao had already returned from outside, holding the life guarding blade in his hand. After absorbing the piece of life gold brought out by the golden hawksbill turtle back then, the life guarding blade had already transformed into the life sword, its jade green blade radiating dense life force. Once the laboratory door was closed, the entire research room was filled with intense life energy. Although this life energy only benefited Huo Yuhao, who possessed a physical body, it still nourished the spiritual senses of the six spirit beings, so they all showed expressions of satisfaction. The Snow Empress nodded to Huo Yuhao and said, Let's begin. I will pass on all my experience to you, so you can avoid unnecessary detours. Just follow my instructions. All right. Huo Yuhao was already in near optimal condition. After retrieving the life sword and bathing in its dense life energy, his physical state had reached its peak. He sat cross-legged, placing the life sword across his knees, closed his eyes, and slowly circulated his soul power along the route of the mysterious heaven technique. Half a year ago, his soul power had already reached level 89. Although he had not yet broken through, he had never stopped cultivating with Tang Wutong, and his soul power had become extremely profound. As it circulated within him, it surged like vast ocean waves, dense and full of substance. After one full cycle of soul power circulation, a continuous self-renewing effect formed within his body. His spiritual power was abundant and naturally circulating. When soul power reached near his head, it would be naturally drawn toward the soul core, circling and compressing beside it. The 6 great soul spirits all reintegrated into Huo Yuhao's body. Mermaid Princess Leia and the heavenly dream ice silkworm guarded the spiritual sea, while the other 4 great soul spirits moved into the soul power around Huo Yuhao's chest area, silently sensing the changes in his soul power. The Snow Emperor's voice rang out in Huo Yuhao's mind. Yuhao, the first thing you must do is draw your soul power away from the soul core side, leaving only spiritual power there. All right, Huo Yuhao responded and began circulating his soul power. Through its flow, he guided the compressed soul power around his forehead's soul core outward. This was not an easy task, as his body's endurance had limits. After forming the soul core, it continuously compressed his soul power, allowing him to store more. Now that he was pulling the soul power out, it immediately filled his meridians. Soon, there was no empty space left in them at all. Yuhao, continue. Don't stop. The Snow Emperor's voice came again. At the same time, Huo Yuhao clearly felt a slight tremor in the bones of his chest and back. Immediately afterward, a jade-green glow radiated from them. The massive amount of soul power accumulated within his body was instantly absorbed by the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone, flowing into the torso bone and creating space within his meridians once again. Huo Yuhao felt a surge of joy, already beginning to understand what the Ice Empress and Snow Emperor intended to do. He did not dare delay, quickly controlling the compressed soul power within his spiritual soul core to flow outward. Everything proceeded smoothly. It was normal for soul masters to expend soul power. This often happened in battle. Moreover, his spiritual soul core was primarily composed of spiritual power, and the closest energies to the core were highly compressed spiritual forces. Thus, once the soul power was drawn out, Huo Yuhao's spiritual soul core became noticeably more active. His spiritual sea began to circulate rapidly, and spiritual power naturally began to be released outward. Under normal circumstances, this released spiritual power would naturally attract heaven and earth energy, absorbing it back into the body and converting it once again into Huo Yuhao's soul power, replenishing his consumption. This was also the strength of the soul core. Given enough time, even without meditation, it could help a soul master recover soul power. However, at this moment, Huo Yuhao clearly did not need his soul core to restore his soul power. A faint layer of light appeared on Huo Yuhao's skin. The glow was white. This was Tianming Ice Silkworm's work. No one understood Huo Yuhao's body better than his brother Tianming. Back when Huo Yuhao encountered the heavenly dream Ice Silkworm, it merged with him and became his first spirit ring. At that time, Huo Yuhao was like a blank sheet of paper. Over the years, he had grown step by step under its watch, so Tianming naturally knew his condition better than anyone. Without needing Snow Emperor's instruction, Brother Tianming had already done the most correct thing, mobilizing Huo Yuhao's spiritual power to block the communication between his spiritual soul core and the outside world's heaven and earth energy. This prevented external energy from entering the core's surroundings and reforming soul power. The spiritual power released from the spiritual soul core thus became even stronger, while the resistance from the outside world instead became a driving force for its circulation. Mermaid Princess Leia also acted at this moment. Her gentle spiritual power surrounded the soul core, slowing its rotation and applying a certain degree of suppression. Meanwhile, Huo Yuhao did his best to accelerate the extraction of the compressed soul power within the soul core. The soul core's backlash began once Huo Yuhao had extracted more than 70% of its soul power. A powerful suction force caused the spiritual barrier set up by the heavenly dream ice silkworm to waver, and although Leia was doing her best to control it, she could only slightly delay the formation of that suction force. This was the power of the soul core. Once formed, it became the source of all a soul master's strength. How could it be so easily shaken? Huo Yuhao's will remained extremely firm. Despite sensing these changes, he had no intention of altering his actions and continued to fully extract his compressed soul power. At this moment, the advantage of the mermaid princess became apparent. Leah's primary task was not to slow the soul core's rotation, but to maintain its stability. This allowed Huo Yuhao to avoid distraction. One must know that if the soul core became unstable, there was a risk of explosion. Although the soul core was already formed and relatively resilient, Huo Yuhao's current method of forcefully extracting power without allowing recovery would still cause turbulence. At that point, he would need to expend energy to stabilize it. In this task, Leo was taking care of it for him. Heavenly Dream Eye Silkworm also intensified its extraction of Huo Yuhao's spiritual energy, continuing to isolate him from the outside world. At this moment, no one dared to hold back. Everyone was going all out. Time passed second by second. Huo Yuhao could clearly feel his spiritual sea trembling continuously under the pull of the soul core, as if it wanted to release spiritual energy to help restore his soul power. What Liu was doing now was like tightly holding the soul core in place, preventing it from vibrating. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Dream Eye Silkworm was wrapping around Huo Yuhao's body from the outside, sealing him off from the outside world. On the other side, the four great ultimate ice spirits still showed no movement, except that the Ice Empress kept controlling the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone, absorbing the soul power transferred by Huo Yuhao. At this moment, the strength of the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone became evident. From the beginning until now, it had already absorbed 50% of Huo Yuhao's soul power, yet still seemed far from reaching its limit. Instead, it had only become more vividly emerald in color, without the slightest feeling of fullness in Huo Yuhao's body. With the help of the 6 spirit souls, Huo Yuhao at least felt relatively relaxed in the early stage of the process, and had not yet encountered any difficulties. As more and more soul power was absorbed, each terrifying fluctuation caused Huo Yuhao's soul core to become increasingly violent. Liu was beginning to struggle. Controlling the spiritual soul core was essentially a confrontation against Huo Yuhao's powerful spiritual energy. Yuhao, control the soul core and slow it down, the Snow Empress said. With a thought, Huo Yuhao immediately brought his spiritual soul core back under his control. The entire core also stabilized. Liu was immediately freed and rested within his spiritual sea. However, having regained control of the spiritual soul core, Huo Yuhao could no longer divert his attention to draw out his own soul power. At this moment, he was suppressing the soul core's instinct. The stronger the suppression of its instinct, the more intense the rebound would become. A powerful suction force came from his dantian, extracting the last of the ultimate ice spirit power around Huo Yuhao's soul core. This force naturally came from the Snow Empress. She had finally made her move. Huo Yuhao could faintly sense a rhombic ice crystal forming within his dantian, generating a powerful suction force that drew all his soul power into it. Moreover, during the absorption process, it was actually compressing that soul power, functioning similarly to a soul core. The aura emanating from that ice crystal was unmistakably the Snow Empress's. What exactly was she doing? Huo Yuhao understood clearly that as a spirit soul, the Snow Empress could control ultimate ice, but it should not be something she could directly absorb. Compressing it in this way would certainly consume a great deal of her spiritual sense. However, at this moment, he had no time to ask. Once started, it could not be stopped. Spiritual energy flowed as the air trembled faintly. As a controller of the spiritual soul core, Huo Yuhao's own control was far more effective than Li Ya's earlier attempt. He sank his mind into the spiritual soul core, placing it into a semi-dormant state, allowing soul power to be drawn away freely. Part of it merged into the area around the rhombic crystal in his dantian, while another part was absorbed by the Ice Empress, who was controlling the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone. The soul power within Huo Yuhao's body was rapidly diminishing. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, There were no longer any soul power fluctuations around the spiritual soul core. All soul power had been drawn out of Huo Yuhao's body. Yet even then, the Ice Snow Empresses did not stop. Instead, they continued absorbing, constantly drawing soul power into their respective locations, gradually emptying Huo Yuhao's body. Huo Yuhao had already begun to vaguely guess what the Ice Snow Empresses were trying to do. With their help, forming this second soul core truly saved him a tremendous amount of effort. It had to succeed. The Snow Empress and Ice Empress accelerated their absorption almost simultaneously. The soul power in Huo Yuhao's body vanished at an astonishing speed, quickly being drawn into those two locations. His body felt increasingly hollow, even accompanied by waves of weakness, while his spiritual soul core trembled even more violently. It craved energy. Although it was a spiritual soul core, its desire for power was no less intense. The Snow Empress's voice sounded, "Yuhao, I'm going to begin. What follows will be pain. When I start forming your second soul core, your spiritual soul core will resist extremely strongly. It will instinctively feel that someone is trying to invade and destroy its territory, and it will inevitably counterattack fiercely. What you need to do is hold it steady at all costs and prevent it from interfering with me as much as possible. Leah, get ready. Help him if necessary. Heavenly Dream, continue protecting him from the outside." Huo Yuhao conveyed a firm affirmative thought to the Snow Empress while concentrating his spiritual power. Self-restraint against one's own bodily instincts is by no means a comfortable thing. But Huo Yuhao was now handling it with ease. This was the strength of his powerful spiritual control. Within Huo Yuhao's hollow body, a thread of soul power quietly emerged. This thread of soul power came from the Dantian region, from the rhombic ice crystal that was the Snow Empress's incarnation. Around the rhombic ice crystal, ultimate ice spirit power swirled like a galaxy, extremely solid and condensed. Separating out this thread caused no impact whatsoever. This thread of soul power slowly rose, drifting all the way to Huo Yuhao's chest. It paused there for a moment before quietly beginning to rotate. Huo Yuhao's spiritual soul core had always rotated clockwise, but after pausing, this thread of soul power condensed into a tiny grain-sized speck, stopping at the very center of his chest. Its rotation direction, however, was counterclockwise. The slight rotation caused no disturbance. However, behind this speck of soul power was a thread connecting to the Dantian, where all the soul power previously absorbed by the Snow Empress was stored. In other words, this rotating speck of soul power was continuously being strengthened under the Snow Empress's control. Its rotation speed was not fast, nor was its energy amplification. It rotated extremely steadily, very steadily. At this moment, on the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone controlled by the Ice Empress, a jade-green light flickered, forming a layer that tried its best to block external perception of the energy at the chest. "Yuhao, we cannot completely isolate the counterclockwise rotating ultimate ice spirit power. Otherwise, once the isolation is lifted, your spiritual soul core and it will erupt into a violent conflict. Your body would absolutely not be able to withstand it. It would directly explode. So we can only let your spiritual soul core gradually adapt to its existence, slowly shifting from rejection to acceptance. This process is the hardest. The impact is about to begin. Get ready." "All right, bring it on," Huo Yuhao replied. He completely ignored the situation in his Dantian and chest, focusing all his spiritual will on his spiritual soul core. The ultimate ice spirit power at his chest began to accelerate its rotation. On Huo Yuhao's side, his spiritual soul core seemed to already sense that something was wrong. It first trembled slightly, then began to struggle under Huo Yuhao's will. This was his own soul core, so Huo Yuhao could naturally sense what it intended to do. It wanted to spin rapidly and, relying on its powerful spiritual force, tear apart the thing that dared challenge it. Huo Yuhao's control intensified accordingly. The trembling of the spiritual soul core became increasingly violent. The ultimate ice spirit power at his chest gradually grew to the size of a grain of rice. Huo Yuhao forcefully maintained control, preventing the spiritual soul core from interfering. On the Snow Empress's side, she steadily continued increasing the condensation of ultimate ice spirit power without accelerating it. As she had said, this was to allow the spiritual soul core to slowly adapt. However, this adaptation began from intense rejection. The feeling of dizziness grew stronger and stronger. Resisting one's own spiritual soul core was essentially resisting one's own spiritual origin. Huo Yuhao's spiritual world began to experience hallucinations. Although he was forcefully maintaining control, this suppression had already caused his spiritual sea to tremble. At that moment, a melodious song rang out, and Leah quietly released her spiritual power outward. Her spiritual power carried an enchanting force, stabilizing the spiritual sea, easing Huo Yuhao's pain, and weakening the soul core struggle. The rotation of the ultimate ice spirit power was not only strengthening, it was also accelerating. Leah's assistance only brought a brief moment of calm before an even stronger wave of impact arrived again. Yuhao, you can relax your control over the soul core a little. You cannot suppress it completely. That would be detrimental to the later fusion. Relax a little? When Huo Yuhao actually did so, he discovered that the consequences were even more difficult than when he had fully sealed the spiritual soul core. Once a gap appeared, spiritual power surged forth, not dispersing outward, but instead rushing straight toward his chest, attempting to shatter the grain-sized rotating ultimate ice spirit power. A flash of jade light sealed the chest completely. Ice Empress made her move. The ultimate ice spirit power blocked the spiritual force outside, protecting the central origin. When spiritual power and ultimate ice collided for an instant, Huo Yuhao's entire body violently trembled. In that moment, his blood flow seemed to reverse, bringing an indescribable sense of agony. Huo Yuhao loosened a slight gap in his spiritual soul core, which immediately began to pulsate wildly, attempting to release even more spiritual power to assault Ice Empress's defense. Yet Huo Yuhao had to both maintain the output of spiritual power and ensure it did not exceed the limit. Compared to the earlier sealing state, this control had become even more difficult. Ice Empress maintained the defense, while Snow Emperor continued to exert control. The output speed of ultimate ice spirit power finally began to increase. The originally grain of rice-sized ultimate ice spirit power soon grew to the size of a soybean. Meanwhile, waves of spiritual power grew increasingly frantic as they assaulted Ice Empress's defenses. Wave after wave of intense pain surged through him. Huo Yuhao had to endure physical agony, maintain control over his spiritual soul core, and also withstand the growing sense of weakness continuously rising from his spiritual sea. Relying on his powerful willpower, he forcibly endured all of it in such a painful state without the slightest tremor. Huo Yuhao's resilience also gave the 6 great soul spirits great confidence. A faint white glow began to appear over Huo Yuhao's bones and meridians. The cooling sensation significantly eased the stabbing pain caused by the impact. This was the power of Ice Bear King Xiaobai, who had begun to protect Huo Yuhao's body. Although the pain was slightly relieved, Huo Yuhao did not relax at all, because his spiritual soul core was continuously strengthening along with the condensation of ultimate ice spirit power within his chest. Steadfast in his spiritual will, Huo Yuhao's confidence grew stronger and stronger. With the help of the 6 great soul spirits, if he still could not succeed, it would truly be a failure to live up to such heavenly favor. As his mindset stabilized, even the pain he felt seemed to lessen. Silently, he concentrated his spiritual power, carefully controlling the spiritual soul core so that its operation slowed further, while the output of spiritual power remained steady and continuous. Within his chest, the ultimate ice spirit power, whose essence was continuously growing, began rotating faster as well, absorbing ultimate ice spirit power at an increasing rate. However, this process itself also started to bring him pain. After all, this was a reversal process. And with that reversal directly occurring within his own body, Huo Yuhao had to endure a dual layer of suffering. Sharp stabbing pain constantly surged from his chest, gradually turning into a suffocating sensation. But this level of pain was still not enough to break Huo Yuhao. However, he soon discovered something that surprised him. Within his Dantian region, the rhombic ice crystal formed by Snow Emperor had actually begun to slowly rise. This rhombic ice crystal and the condensed ultimate ice spirit power in his chest had always been linked through soul power. But now, that mutual attraction had shifted. Instead of a balanced connection, it felt as though the upper force was absorbing the lower one. This tiny cluster of soul power was actually drawing Snow Emperor's power upward. What is Snow Emperor doing? Huo Yuhao did not understand, but at a moment like this, trust was everything. Of course, he would not question it, nor would he doubt it. As the Snow Emperor ice crystal rose, the condensation speed of the soul power in his chest also increased. The physical pain intensified, and his spiritual soul core struggled even more violently. The two sensations combined were far more than a simple addition of 1 + 1 = 2. Ice Empress's defensive power remained extremely stable. Using his spine as the core and his ribs in front and back as structural support, Huo Yuhao formed a complete protective framework. However, he noticed that Ice Empress was no longer blocking all incoming spiritual power completely. Instead, she allowed in a strand thinner than a hair by 100-fold, letting it land on the ultimate ice spirit power. The moment that strand of spiritual power touched it, the rotation speed of the ultimate ice spirit power was affected, slowing slightly compared to before, yet still rotating steadily and persistently. The spiritual power was drawn into it and continuously impacted. This was a true approach toward fusion, a shift from confrontation to integration. However, this collision only brought Huo Yuhao even greater pain. As the soul core expanded, the spiritual power released by Ice Empress also increased, but its growth lagged behind the expansion speed of the soul core. As a result, the pain Huo Yuhao endured became increasingly intense. Ice Bear King Xiao Bai continued releasing his power, reinforcing Huo Yuhao's meridians and bones. His bones were relatively stable thanks to the support of the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone, so the impact there was manageable. However, the chest cavity houses the lungs and heart, along with numerous major meridians. All of these were continuously subjected to the dual reversed energy impact, making the pain Huo Yuhao experienced self-evident. The Ice Empress ice crystal stopped rising at a point less than 3 inches away from that small cluster of soul power, halting just below the lower edge of the chest cavity. As a result, the rate at which she was feeding energy into the soul core increased significantly. Once the volume of the ultimate ice energy expanded to about the size of a juju pit, it temporarily stopped increasing in size, but continued to rotate, growing ever brighter. At this point, even an outside observer looking at Huo Yuhao could see that his entire torso was suffused with jade-green light, while at his chest there was still a small cluster of bluish-white glow that kept intensifying. The pain was intensifying, yet Huo Yuhao's control remained extremely stable. For an ordinary soul master, reaching this stage would already be unbearable, and at the very least they would not be able to maintain such precise control. But he still held steady without the slightest tremor. At the same time as Huo Yuhao was in seclusion, the entire Shrek City had also begun to get busy. Various preparations were underway inside Shrek City, with considerable assistance coming from the Tang sect. What? Yuhao is in seclusion? Then were the 3 great soul engineer legions of Shrek. Where are they? Xun'er stood before Su Sanshur, anxiety evident in her eyes. Su Sanshur was at a loss for words. When they had just returned to the academy, Huo Yuhao had only released them, and the 3 soul engineer legions were still resting in his undead demiplane. At this moment, Huo Yuhao was in seclusion, and Bei Bei and Tang Wutong were also absent. In reality, Xianxia had no idea what was going on. Xun'er's aura became noticeably unsteady. That brat Yuhao. Since when did he become so unreliable? At a time like this, he's actually in seclusion? What is he trying to do? She paced angrily on the spot. Xianxia could only feel helpless. With both Bei Bei and Huo Yuhao absent, he was the one in charge of the Tang sect, yet he now had to face Xun'er's fury. Come, take me to Yuhao. If his seclusion isn't too deep, have him release the 3 Soul Engineer Legions first so we can make arrangements. Do you realize that outside Shrek City, a main force of over 600,000 troops from the Sun Moon Empire is stationed, with at least 8 Soul Engineer Legions watching us like hawks, ready to launch an attack at any moment? Xianxia froze. He truly had not known this. Hearing Xun'er's words, he immediately felt his scalp go numb. But Dean Yuhao is in seclusion. If we disturb him and cause him to go berserk, what then? Xun'er grew even more frustrated. She had always cared deeply for Huo Yuhao, but at such a critical moment, he had chosen to go into seclusion as if escaping reality, and had not released the 3 major Soul Engineer Legions of Shrek Academy. How could she not be anxious? Huo Yuhao actually hadn't done it on purpose. He had simply forgotten. At that time, he was in a state of internal conflict, pondering how to deal with the current situation. After finally coming up with a solution, he immediately set about acting on it, but completely forgot the importance of the 3 Soul Engineer Legions to Shrek City. Do you think I don't know how important his seclusion is? But this is already a matter of life and death for the Academy. If the Sun Moon Empire attacks and our defenses are insufficient, what then? Xun'er said angrily. What is that Huo Yuhao even doing? Bei Bei and Tang Wutong are also gone. Are the 3 of them trying to drive me insane? Dean Xian, please don't be anxious. Panicking won't help, Jiang Nan said from the side. She stepped forward and added, how about this? We take you to the place where Yuhao is in seclusion first. With your cultivation, you should be able to sense his condition. If you think he can be awakened, then we wake him up. If not, I'm sure you won't insist. After all, if Yuhao goes berserk, he won't be able to use that incantation to communicate with the undead demiplane, and then we still won't be able to bring back the 3 Soul Engineer Legions. Xun'er stamped her foot. Then that's the only option left. Take me there. If it were anyone else who made such a mistake, with Xun'er's temperament, she would have already stormed in. But toward the Tang sect, she was somewhat powerless. Over the years, the Tang sect's development had become extremely important to Shrek City. Without Tang sect's soul tools, Shrek Academy would have found it very difficult to hold out during the beast tide triggered by the Star Do Great Forest. Because of this, the Tang sect's status within Shrek City had continued to rise. More than that, over a year ago, Huo Yuhao had refined the Heaven and Earth Creation Pill using all kinds of rare heavenly materials and earthly treasures. Yet he selflessly handed part of it over to the Academy, which allowed Elder Xian to successfully break through and become a limit Douluo. She and xianxia had also consolidated their foundations, gaining the possibility of attempting a breakthrough to limit Douluo in the future. These favors were all firmly remembered in their hearts. Because of this, even though Huo Yuhao now gave off such an unreliable impression, Xun'er still had to suppress her anger. Under the guidance of Xianxia and Jiang Nan, Xun'er followed them into the underground soul tool hall of the Tang sect. They knew exactly where Huo Yuhao's research lab was. Soon they arrived. However, before they could get close, they were stopped by none other than Hikaitu. Xianxia, Nan, what are you doing here? Junior brother is in closed-door cultivation in that lab. No one is allowed to approach. What if he gets disturbed? On the surface, Xianxia had acted indifferent toward Huo Yuhao's seclusion, but in reality, the moment Huo Yuhao began his closed-door cultivation, he had immediately informed Hikaitu. Hikaitu dropped everything he was doing and came here to personally guard him. Xianxia said bitterly, Kaitu, something big has happened. The Sun Moon Empire army is already at our doorstep, But Junior Brother forgot to release the 3 major soul engineer core. That's why Dean Xian came looking for him. How far along is Junior Brother in his seclusion? Hikaitu froze for a moment, glanced at the furious Xun'er, and said with a wry smile, I don't know how far along he is. But he absolutely cannot be disturbed. You can quietly sense it. The aura coming from Junior Brother's side is terrifying. As he spoke, he pointed toward the door of Huo Yuhao's lab, not far behind him. Xun'er narrowed her eyes slightly and quietly released her spiritual power, probing toward the direction of the lab. Xianxia and Jiang Nanan stood beside Hikaitu. Although they did nothing outwardly, they subconsciously blocked Xun'er's path together with him. If Dean Xian lost her temper and tried to rush in, they would stop her. At a critical moment like this, one's own brothers always came first. However, their actions were clearly unnecessary. After only a brief sense, Xun'er's expression changed drastically, and she even took an unconscious step back. The laboratory was very well sealed. Its heavy metal door almost completely isolated the aura inside. But even with just a trace leaking out, Xun'er, despite being a super Douluo, could still faintly perceive the changes within. Yes, the aura inside was terrifying, chaotically terrifying. How can it be so chaotic? What is Yuhao doing? Don't tell me he's gone in a chi deviation? Xun'er exclaimed in shock. At her words, Hikaitu and the others also changed expression at the same time. If Huo Yuhao truly went into chi deviation, it would be a disaster for the entire Tang sect. Xianxia urgently asked, Chi deviation? Dean Xian, are you certain of her judgment? Xun'er paused, her brows tightly furrowed as she continued to sense carefully. The more she sensed, the more her expression changed. After a moment, her face suddenly shifted again. I understand what he's doing now. That brat is actually attempting to condense his second soul core. No wonder the aura is so chaotic. But why does his breakthrough feel different from Elder Xian's? Ordinary people might not be able to determine this, but Xun'er was different. She had cultivated alongside Elder Xian and personally experienced the aura fluctuations when he attempted to break through to limit Douluo. At that time, Elder Xian had chosen to have her and xianxia accompany him during seclusion precisely because they were the ones most likely to reach that level in the future. That was why she could faintly recognize what was happening now. Very few people in Shrek Academy knew that Huo Yuhao already possessed a spiritual soul core. Elder Xian had not hidden this from xianxia or Xun'er, as they were all future pillars of the academy. In recent years, Huo Yuhao's growth had been far too rapid, so fast that he was already approaching the level of their generation. Attempting a second soul core at this moment? If he succeeded, Huo Yuhao would very likely become the first person in history to possess a second soul core at the moment of becoming a Title Douluo. In that case, in the future he will inevitably become a rank 98 Super Douluo, and it will take him a very short time to reach that stage. Once one reaches the Super Douluo level, there are essentially no bottlenecks that can hinder him. The only thing that can affect his further progress is that when he reaches rank 98 and attempts to break through to rank 99, he will need a third soul core, an unprecedented third soul core. No one knows whether Huo Yuhao will succeed at that point. But Xun'er is very clear that once the second soul core is established, no matter what level Huo Yuhao's soul power is at, he will possess the combat strength of a Super Douluo and an ultimate martial soul Super Douluo at that. His cultivation might even surpass hers. As the anger in his heart gradually subsided, Yuhao's breakthrough of the second soul core carried extraordinary significance for Shrek Academy as well. However, his aura was so chaotic right now. What if he suffers chi deviation? Xun'er frowned and said, Yuhao must be attempting to break through his second soul core, but I can't quite understand his current condition. You all stay here and guard him well. Do not let anyone approach him, and do not disturb him. When a soul master attempts to form a second soul core, the situation becomes extremely complex and can change in an instant. I will go ask Elder Xian immediately. only he has sufficient experience in this regard. Xun'er has always been decisive and action-oriented. After speaking, she left immediately. Break through the second soul core? Hikaitu, Su Sanshur, and Jiang Nanan exchanged glances. They were all at over rank 80 in soul power, yet they were still far from the level of Title Douluo. When they attempted to reach Title Douluo, they would only need their first soul ring. Among the Shrek 7 monsters at present, Bei Bei and Su Sanshur were closest to rank 90, followed by Hikaitu, Jiang Nanan, and Xiao Xiao. The heaven and earth creation pill truly possessed transformative power. They had taken it a long time ago, yet its effects were still continuing to take hold. As a result, the Tang sect members' cultivation speed was far faster than ordinary soul masters. Hikaitu sighed and said, "The gap between Yuhao and us is getting bigger and bigger." Su Sanshur also gave a wry smile. "I still remember the first time we met. He was kick-flying by me back then. Of course, I got blackmailed by that guy, Bei Bei, afterward." Jiang Nanan's pretty face flushed slightly. "And you still have the nerve to say that? You got off easy. He should have beaten you up." Su Sanshur chuckled. "Would you have been willing to let that happen? Actually, already liked me back then, didn't you? Hey, do you even have shame? I hated you back then." Su Sanshur said, "Let's just hope our junior brother succeeds. If he does, the Tang sect strength will truly be different. Tang Wutong is already a Title Douluo. If junior brother also becomes one, then when they join forces, their combat power will continue to grow. In my opinion, they might even surpass ordinary Super Douluo. It's not impossible that they could even reach the level of Limit Douluo." Elder Xian arrived quickly. In less than 10 minutes after Xun'er left, he rushed over with her. Elder Xian stood silently at the entrance of Huo Yuhao's laboratory, sensing the situation. No one had more experience than him. He had failed countless times when attempting to break through the second soul core, so he was extremely familiar with this aura. After standing there for a full 15 minutes, Elder Xian finally turned around with a solemn expression. "That's right. Xun'er is correct. Yuhao is indeed attempting to break through his second soul core. From now on, I will personally guard him here. No one is allowed to approach or disturb him, not even loud noises nearby." As he spoke, Elder Xian sat down cross-legged right at the entrance of the laboratory. Xun'er was greatly shocked. Looking at him, she said, "Elder Xian, what about the academy? The Sun Moon Empire is at our doorstep." Elder Xian sighed softly. "Xun'er, don't you understand yet? The judgment Wutong made in the meeting is actually accepted by Yuhao. It's just that because of the academy, he didn't say it. We value the academy's safety too much. We simply didn't dare believe his judgment. He knows he can't do much, so he chose to retreat and cultivate in seclusion. As for the matters of the 3 Soul Engineer Corps, there are only 2 possibilities for why he didn't reveal them. One is that he is acting out of anger, but I believe that possibility is very small. The other is that he is preserving living strength." Xun'er frowned. "That's not right. If his judgment is correct, then the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't attack us at all. The 3 Soul Engineer Corps wouldn't suffer any damage." Elder Xian shook his head. "Your perspective is still too limited. Let me ask you this. If Xingluo and Ling empires come to reinforce us, and one of them is attacked, can the Academy just sit back and do nothing? At that point, we would have no reason not to send out Soul Engineer Corps to assist. Being able to deploy forces and not doing so is very different from not having forces at all. Yuhao must have deeper intentions behind this." How could Elder Xian know that Huo Yuhao had not actually thought that far at the time? He had simply forgotten. Xun'er lowered her head. After a long silence, she said, "Elder Xian, but we still cannot be careless. Even if there's only a 1 in 1,000 chance, we must prepare with full force. The Academy's foundation of 10,000 years is at stake." Elder Xian said, "Go back. You and Xiaoxia will be in charge of the Academy. I will stay here. If Yuhao succeeds in his breakthrough, then perhaps everything will be resolved." Xun'er's eyes flickered with a trace of shock. Could a breakthrough by Huo Yuhao really resolve everything so easily? Was that even possible? No matter how it was said, he was still only one person's strength. Even with the cultivation of an ultimate Douluo like Elder Xian, it was not enough. So how could he possibly compare, even if he possessed twin soul cores? However, she did not voice the doubts in her heart. Seeing that Elder Xian was determined to stay, she could only quickly return and report the situation here to the other Sea God Pavilion members. Xian Lina left, and Su Sanshi and the other two were also sent away by Elder Xian. Elder Xian sat alone outside Huo Yuhao's door, a look of melancholy on his aged face. Yuhao, oh Yuhao, you truly are unbelievably bold. You actually chose to walk that path. With Elder Xian's understanding of the second soul core, how could he not see that Huo Yuhao was not cultivating using the isotonic resonance method? On the contrary, he could see it very clearly. The mutual balance of yin and yang was what caused such chaotic energy flow. Yet within that chaos, there was still a firm force holding everything together. In other words, at least for now, there was no danger of Huo Yuhao going into chi deviation. Although Elder Xian no longer had any possibility of condensing a soul core through the yin-yang complementary method, he was filled with longing and curiosity toward this cultivation path, which was why he chose to stay. Moreover, what he had just said was also correct. If Huo Yuhao could successfully cultivate a second soul core through the yin-yang complementary method, then in the future he might well become another beast god. Compared to innate talent, Huo Yuhao did not possess a physical body as powerful as Dition, the beast god. However, he had exceptional talents that soul beasts did not possess, twin martial souls, and yin-yang complementary dual soul cores. Once successful, Elder Xian believed that even if Huo Yuhao could not break through to the level of an ultimate Douluo and was limited to rank 98, his strength might still be able to rival the beast god. Do not forget how skilled Huo Yuhao was at concealment. His powerful spiritual strength might very well have the potential to change the entire battlefield situation. One intelligent young man. Even in such a chaotic and passive situation, he was still able to make the most correct decision. Truly worthy of being Mu Lao's last disciple. Mu Lao, do you know? I'm quite envious of you. Huo Yuhao was completely unaware of everything happening outside. At this moment, his body was already approaching the brink of collapse. Inside his chest, the rotation speed of the ultimate ice energy mass was increasing more and more rapidly. The strand of spiritual power that Ice Empress had sent over was completely unable to stop it. Instead, it was even dragged along and began rotating in the opposite direction. As a result, his spiritual power itself began to twist. The spiritual soul core was triggered and had already begun to erupt in fury. Although Huo Yuhao was doing everything he could to suppress it, the spiritual power erupting from his soul core could not be fully blocked even by his willpower. The Ice Empress and Snow Empress, however, remained stable, maintaining their previous state. But Huo Yuhao felt as if his body was about to be torn apart by these two terrifying forces. That pain was indescribable and far beyond what he had experienced when he first fused with the Ice Empress. Am I really going to lose control? The immense pain caused the first signs of wavering in Huo Yuhao's willpower. At this moment, if observed from outside, he would appear extremely horrifying. Fine beads of blood constantly seeped from his skin, and the moment they appeared, they were instantly frozen into ice crystals and fell away. The entire laboratory was filled with chaotic and violent energy. Various rare metals piled around the laboratory were crackling and popping. The temperature inside the lab had already dropped to around minus 100 degrees Celsius, and ice blossoms had even begun to drift through the air. Hold on. No matter what, I must hold on. Yuhao bit down hard on the tip of his tongue. The sharp pain allowed his spirit to lift slightly, once again forcibly suppressing the eruption of his spiritual soul core. His soul core was already stable enough. Under such provocation, it only mounted a strong counterattack without itself being shaken. This was the one piece of good fortune amid misfortune. Princess Mermaid Leia was already doing everything she could to assist Huo Yuhao. Her singing had become somewhat hoarse, yet she continued without stopping. It was precisely her additional support that allowed Huo Yuhao's own spiritual will to be fully focused on control. Huo Yuhao did not dare imagine what would have happened if he had attempted this yin-yang complementary cultivation method before fusing with the mermaid princess. But he was certain that he would not have been able to endure to this point. Light continued to flicker across his body. The ultimate ice soul power released by the Ice Empress was extremely powerful and domineering, and each time it forcibly suppressed the vast majority of Huo Yuhao's spiritual power. It is no longer just the power of ultimate ice. It also carries the power of Ice Empress's spiritual origin. Only through the enhancement of spiritual power can she resist so smoothly. Around the Snow Emperor Ice Crystal, soul power continued to be output, yet remained exceptionally stable. At this moment, it seemed as if she had completely ignored the pain Huo Yuhao might be enduring, focusing entirely on her own task. The Ice Bear King Xiaobai was also nearing his limit. His power had been continuously protecting Huo Yuhao's meridians, bones, and internal organs. However, those two opposing forces circulating within him were simply too violent. Huo Yuhao's spiritual power could still hold on, but his body was beginning to show signs of collapse. Although his body had been improved by life gold and possessed far greater vitality than ordinary people, the violent forces inside him were ultimately not something a human body could withstand. His meridians felt as if they were about to snap, and his internal organs were being squeezed and twisted to the brink of collapse. Yet at this moment, Huo Yuhao could do nothing except endure. Blood had already begun to seep from the corner of his mouth, caused by ruptured capillaries. If this continued, his body might be directly torn apart by the forces within, and his spiritual soul core would also explode as a result. The Snow Emperor Ice Crystal flickered faintly. Just as it was about to take action, suddenly, a light flashed in Huo Yuhao's dantian. Immediately after, a layer of golden light surged rapidly from within it and spread throughout his entire body. Neither the spiritual power released from his spiritual soul core nor the ultimate ice power at his chest could stop the appearance of this golden light. Because this golden energy was completely integrated into Huo Yuhao's bloodline. In just a few breaths, his meridians had turned entirely golden. Even his blood and internal organs had become the same. From the outside, Huo Yuhao now appeared solemn and majestic, his entire body radiating golden light. Moreover, fine scales began to appear on his body's surface. Golden scales, pure and radiant. These scales gradually grew larger and covered his whole body, leaving only his face still in human form. These scales were dragon scales. Yes, dragon scales of the light, holy dragon. The intense pain inside his body was instantly relieved. Even Huo Yuhao himself was shocked at where this golden light came from. It made his meridians, bones, and internal organs all become even more powerful. Moreover, this golden light was fusing directly with his body, becoming a true part of him. Was this power? This pure aura of light felt so familiar. It was not the power of Wang Qiuer's golden dragon, nor did it come from the three-eyed golden lion, but rather, the light holy dragon. Yes, this was clearly the power of the light holy dragon. And more importantly, this was not the light holy dragon martial soul transformed by his senior brother. It was far purer and more profound than his senior brother's power. Could this be the teacher's power? But how is that possible? Shrek Academy, Sea God Island, Sea God Pavilion, the Golden Tree. A gentle golden light was faintly emitted from the trunk of the golden tree, and the soft energy fluctuations allowed everyone on Sea God Island to clearly sense it. The elders all walked out of the Sea God Pavilion and came before the golden tree, including Xun'er, who had only recently returned. A mass of golden light suddenly rose from the golden tree and hovered above the Sea God Pavilion. That is, Elder Song's gaze sharpened. Although she could not see what was within the golden light, she could feel its familiar aura. The golden light paused slightly in the air, as if greeting the elders, then transformed into a streak of light and flew toward Shrek City and the Tang sect. Elder Xian silently sat guarding outside Huo Yuhao's laboratory. When the golden power within Huo Yuhao erupted, he immediately sensed it as well from outside. This is such powerful light energy. But when did Yuhao possess such strong light power? Huo Yuhao naturally gave no answer. Elder Xian's expression was filled with uncertainty and shock. At that moment, a gentle aura suddenly swept toward him. Golden light flickered, and a figure of light appeared out of thin air before him. Mulao. Elder Xian instantly shot to his feet, staring in shock at the figure before him. Mulao smiled slightly, nodded at him, then floated forward and gently patted his shoulder. A thought was transmitted into Elder Xian's mind. Shrek will rely on you in the future. Xuanzi, take care. Before Elder Xian could say anything, the golden figure that Mulao had become passed straight through him and disappeared into the massive metal door behind him. Elder Xian's body trembled violently. In the next instant, an ominous premonition welled up within him. Unable to contain himself, he cried out, Mulao. He spun around abruptly and stared at the enormous iron door behind him. For a moment, he could no longer keep his emotions under control. The golden silhouette that was Mulao quietly appeared inside the laboratory, directly before Huo Yuhao. Looking at Huo Yuhao, who sat cross-legged, struggling desperately to endure, a gentle expression appeared on his face. My child, you have chosen the hardest possible path. But for Shrek Academy and for the 3 original nations of Douluo continent, you made the right choice. It is nearly impossible for a human to cultivate the yin-yang complement method successfully. Let your teacher help you walk part of that road. With a flash of golden light, Mulao transformed once more into a golden sphere of light and flew directly into Huo Yuhao's head. A gentle warmth instantly spread throughout Huo Yuhao's entire body. Just moments ago, he had been suffering unbearable agony, but now it felt like rain falling upon parched earth. Huo Yuhao let out a deep sigh of relief. The sudden release of mental strain nearly caused him to lose consciousness. However, that warm, gentle power immediately enveloped his spiritual energy, allowing him to maintain his current state. His spiritual energy quickly settled down. Teacher, it really is you. When Huo Yuhao saw Mulao within his spiritual sea, his emotions surged violently. His spiritual energy condensed into his own form, and he immediately dropped to his knees in a respectful bow. Mulao smiled at his final disciple. He quietly accepted the bow before drifting forward to Huo Yuhao's side and gently patting his head. My child, get up. Huo Yuhao stood and looked at Mulao. Though his spiritual body could not cry, overwhelming joy radiated from him. When someone is at their lowest point and suddenly sees the person they hold dearest, the feeling is beyond words. Having his teacher beside him gave him the comforting sense of being protected. Teacher, Huo Yuhao's voice choked with emotion. Mulao smiled. Don't act like such a child. Yuhao, you've grown up. You've done very well, better than I ever imagined. I am proud of you. Although I haven't been by your side these past years, I've heard most of what has happened to you from Xianzi, and I've witnessed some of it myself. You truly have done an excellent job. Teacher, Huo Yuhao called again. Mulao said, although your decision to cultivate the yin-yang complement method was reckless, it was not wrong in a certain sense. Shrek Academy needs someone powerful enough to turn the tide through their own strength alone. Such a person has not appeared for a very long time. 10,000 years ago, our ancestor Tang single-handedly turned the tide. In the Twin Gods Battle Twin Gods, he laid the foundation for Shrek Academy's 10,000-year legacy. And 10,000 years later, I believe you possess that same potential. If you hadn't awakened the power of the dragon pill within your body, I would never have realized you could reach this point. Since you've already taken this step, let your teacher accompany you a little farther. The dragon pill? Huo Yuhao looked at Mulao in surprise. Mulao nodded. Long Xiaoyao must have been the one who gave it to you. You should have met him once before. You mean Dragon Emperor Douluo Long Xiaoyao? Huo Yuhao stared at Mu Lao in astonishment. That's right, Mu Lao replied. I entrusted him with the dragon pill and asked him to give it to you when the time was right. Huo Yuhao said, but isn't he a member of the Holy Spirit sect? He's on the side of the evil soul masters. Why would he help us? Mu Lao shook his head. Long Xiaoyao is not an evil soul master. He is simply a pitiful man, trapped by love. I was able to break free back then, but he remained lost within it. Because of the mistakes he made in those days, he chose to atone for his own sins, which is why he became what he is now. Even so, he is still a soul master from the 3 original nations of Douluo continent. Before my physical body perished, I met with him and entrusted the dragon pill to him, asking him to give it to you when the opportunity arose. At the same time, I also asked him to protect you whenever possible. Protect me? Huo Yuhao still vividly remembered the agony of the 9 slashes and 18 wounds. Mu Lao smiled and nodded. If he had truly wanted to kill you, you would have died long ago. When the Holy Spirit sect moved against you, if he hadn't been protecting you from the shadows, things would not have turned out as they have. You'll understand in the future. As for the dragon pill, Sun Moon Empire, Bright Capital, Imperial Palace. A secret letter appeared on Su Tianran's desk. On the seal of the letter was a very cute orange pattern. Seeing this secret letter, a faint smile appeared on Su Tianran's face. The letter from Orange had finally arrived. He wondered how she would handle such a situation. For the past few days, despite a full-scale search, there had still been no trace of those enemies. After launching an attack on Bright City, they seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving no evidence behind. It was completely unbelievable. Thinking of what Elder Kong had said about spatial technology, Su Tianran felt a slight chill run down his spine. If the other side truly possessed spatial technology, then the next attack might very well appear inside Bright City itself. He opened the letter and took out the paper. The letter had also been sealed using soul guidance technology. If it was opened incorrectly, its contents would instantly turn to ashes. The letter was filled with Orange's neat and elegant handwriting, every stroke carrying a tone of respect. Just by looking at her handwriting, Su Tianran's mood improved slightly. He couldn't help but think that perhaps the incident involving the child last time had hurt Orange more than he realized. At that time, maybe he should have shown more initiative. However, in any case, he had already entrusted her with military authority, and that trust should be enough to repay her loyalty. As he thought this, Su Tianran began reading the contents of the letter. The more he read, the more his expression changed, surprise at first, but more than anything, admiration. Yes, admiration for Orange. She had actually come up with such an excellent plan to resolve the current situation. Truly worthy of being the Empress God of War. Truly worthy of Orange, whom he trusted the most. The theme of Orange's letter consisted of just 2 words. No attack. Surround Shrek without attacking, forcing Shrek to mobilize all its connections and concentrate everything within Shrek City. Establish defensive lines on the perimeter and rely on linked defense soul guidance devices for protection. Do not take the initiative to attack, and instead give Shrek a long deadline to hand over Huo Yuhao. Once the forces of the Star Luo Empire and the Tianhan Empire are drawn over, the objective will be achieved. As for the true target of attack, it can then be changed at will. If the enemy force inside the Empire is connected to Shrek Academy, then once they learn that Shrek is in such a major crisis, they will inevitably rush back to reinforce it at all costs. At least 2 Soul Engineer Corps would still be a significant force on the battlefield. In that case, no matter how strong they are, they would only be able to clash head-on with the Sun Moon Empire's main army. And in direct confrontation, the Sun Moon Empire was nearly invincible. Good. Su Tianran said 3 good S in a row, as if even his injuries had eased slightly. He immediately wrote a letter and ordered his subordinates to rush it to the front lines. He told Orange that everything on the front line would be decided by her alone, and there was no need to worry about the rear. The Imperial Soul Engineer Legion had already returned to Bright City to defend the Imperial Palace. He looked forward to further good news from the front. Once again, Orange had used her wisdom to earn Su Tianran's even greater trust. Su Tianran already seemed to see Star Luo and the Tianhun Empire falling into his hands one after another. By then, even Shrek would be nothing more than a single city, something he could mold however he wished. In truth, Su Tianran did not want to destroy Shrek City. On the contrary, what he desired most was Shrek's submission. That would bring him the greatest sense of conquest. The reputation of Shrek Academy as the #1 academy on the continent had once also stirred admiration in Su Tianran when he was young. If Shrek were to submit to the Empire in the future, he would be even more delighted. By then, all the secrets of Soul Masters developed by Shrek would belong to the Sun Moon Empire. Perhaps, through the mysteries of martial souls, there might even be a way to help him restore his limbs. Thinking of this, Su Tianran's heart grew increasingly heated. And when he thought of Orange again, how could he not be fond of such a beautiful and capable Empress God of War? She was his Empress, but he still could not conquer her heart. Such pain was fatal to any man, and even a figure like Su Tianran, a generation's warlord, was no exception. Outside Shrek City, 100 li away, in the Sun Moon Empire's main army camp, Orange sat in the commander's seat, looking through report after report of reconnaissance intelligence, a faint smile appearing on her beautiful face. Shrek? Why would I attack Shrek? That academy is the most important place in that man's heart. No matter what, I will never easily destroy Shrek. However, that does not stop me from attacking Ling and Star Luo, especially Star Luo. Although the hatred in Zhu Zi's heart from back then had gradually faded, fading did not mean forgetting. On the contrary, she now had a feeling that everything was under her control, which made her even more eager for that day to arrive. It was the Star Luo Empire's army that destroyed her homeland and turned her into a helpless orphan. If not for that, how could she have met Su Tianran? In any case, in the future, she would still destroy the Star Luo Empire. Only then could the deepest hatred in her heart be fully resolved. However, this time, her target was not Star Luo. Empress. A pitch-black figure silently appeared inside the command tent without any notification. Zhu Zi seemed already accustomed to his arrival. She stood up and smiled as she said, "National Master, you are here." Zhongliwu nodded and slowly walked to a position not far from Zhu Zi before stopping. "Empress, when do you plan to attack Shrek?" Zhu Zi replied, "There are still 8 days left before the deadline we gave them." "National Master, there is no need to rush," Zhongliwu said coldly. "Empress, are you really planning to keep your promise with Shrek?" By now, Shrek Academy's distress signal must have spread across the entire continent. It won't be long before reinforcements from the Star Luo Empire and the Ling Empire arrive. By then, we will have to pay a much greater price to defeat them. Have you not considered the casualties of our soldiers? With our current strength, we could flatten Shrek at any moment. Zhu Zi gently shook her head and said, "National Master should be the one most familiar with Shrek Academy. Then, in your opinion, if we were to launch a full assault now, what price would we have to pay to achieve victory?" Zhongliwu paused for a moment and said, "Shrek Academy has taken in the remnants of the Tianhun Empire, plus its own city defense forces, at most around 100,000 men. Even with some defensive soul tools, the number would not be large. Meanwhile, we have nearly 700,000 troops, as well as 8 Soul Engineer Legions. The power of just the Soul Engineer Legions alone should be enough to break the city walls." Zhu Zi said, "No, it is not that simple. From the information we currently have, Shrek Academy already has the ability to produce level 9 fixed soul guidance shells. We still do not know how many they have produced. Moreover, Shrek Academy is filled with powerful individuals. Every elder in the Sea God Pavilion possesses strength, at least at the Super Douluo level. If pushed to the limit, this academy with 10,000 years of accumulation could erupt with unimaginable power. For us, the best strategy now is to surround them without attacking. As for the reinforcements you mentioned, they are exactly what I'm hoping for. Their arrival would be a true blessing for us. A flash of cold light appeared in Zhongliwu's eyes. He was not a fool, and after hearing Zhu Zi's words, he already realized something. Empress, are you saying you still do not intend to attack Shrek this time? Zhu Zi replied, not yet. The Emperor Dragon and Evil Lord Soul Engineer legions departed 2 nights ago. Our main army camps remain unchanged, but 50,000 troops have already been withdrawn to coordinate with those 2 legions. On the front lines, we only need to keep Shrek Academy occupied. A real assault is not the time yet, but a feint attack is possible. Zhongliwu's breathing became slightly uneven as he said in a deep voice, with our current strength, even if we launch a full-scale attack on Shrek Academy, we could still break the city. Even if they resist, do we not have sufficient offensive power? Once Shrek City is breached, the spiritual pillars of both the Star Luo Empire and the Douling Empire will collapse. Unifying the continent would be just around the corner. I do not understand why your majesty is delaying. Zhu Zi said calmly, National Master, please do not forget your identity. You are the supervising officer, not the commander-in-chief. In terms of strategy and tactics, I remain in charge. If you have any dissatisfaction, you may raise it with His Majesty. If His Majesty also disagrees with my battle plan, I am willing to make changes. Zhongliwu's breathing grew more rapid. For some reason, when facing Zhu Zi, he actually felt a hint of fear. Of course, it was not fear of her strength. In his eyes, with her cultivation level, he could easily crush her. However, this Zhu Zi was truly terrifying. When it came to commanding troops, she was practically godlike. Zhongliwu was no longer young, but he still could not see through Zhu Zi's tactical arrangements when commanding the army. More than once, when he was puzzled, Zhu Zi's flashes of brilliance had led to decisive victories. Because of this, he truly did not dare to completely offend Zhu Zi. Moreover, Zhu Zi had the support of many 9th-rank soul guidance masters around her. Although the Holy Spirit sect experts he had brought were not few in number, soul guidance masters, relatively speaking, feared evil soul masters far less than soul masters did when facing them. Empress, take care of yourself. Zhongliwu flicked his robe sleeve and turned to leave. Zhu Zi watched his departing figure and smiled faintly. Not seeing you off. In the history of any nation, it has always been difficult for a marshal and a supervisory envoy to be of one mind. Otherwise, the supervisory envoy would have no purpose. This supervisory role held by Zhongliwu was not something Su Tianran had wanted to appoint, but the Holy Spirit sect was too powerful, and he had no choice but to do so. The Holy Spirit sect's intention to infiltrate the military had not arisen just recently. However, up to now, the results had not been very good. After all, evil soul masters were ultimately rejected by most people, whether soul masters or soul guidance masters alike. Watching Zhongliwu's figure disappear outside the command tent, Zhu Zi narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly and folded her arms. With these detestable evil soul masters constraining her, her plans would be difficult to execute perfectly. If there was an opportunity, the Holy Spirit sect's role was becoming smaller and smaller. After the body sect was completely destroyed, their only real use was to counter the strong experts of Shrek Academy. If not for the existence of 2 limit Douluo within the Holy Spirit sect, Su Tianran would likely have long since found a way to fully subdue them. Dealing with the Holy Spirit sect was, in fact, a shared intention of both Zhu Zi and Su Tianran. This evil soul master sect would inevitably bring chaos in the future. Once the continent was unified, they would likely try every means to seize control of the nation. As for how they would do it, these mysterious evil soul masters certainly had many unique methods of their own. The future ruler who would unify the entire continent would be her son, and Zhu Zi would never allow the Holy Spirit sect to succeed no matter what. Thinking of her son, Zhu Zi's body trembled slightly, and her gaze softened. Before leaving, she had asked a top expert of the Sun Moon Empire to protect her son, and what she needed to guard against was not a possible enemy, but the Holy Spirit sect itself. What she feared most now was the Holy Spirit sect secretly targeting Su Yunhan. That would be the most dangerous outcome. The war on the front lines had to end as quickly as possible. Only after everything on the battlefield was concluded could she return to the Empire and proceed with the next step of her plan. A faint trace of coldness appeared in Juzi's eyes. What she intended to do was far more than just unifying the continent. Moreover, unifying the continent did not need to be completed so quickly. Shrek City, Tang sect. Buzz, the spiritual soul core, trembled violently, causing an extremely intense spiritual fluctuation to erupt from within Huo Yuhao's body. The Eye of Destiny had already activated on its own without him noticing. In its deep, dark depths, the spiritual soul core flickered with light, but remained in an unstable, violent tremor. A resolute expression appeared on Huo Yuhao's face. The liquid spiritual force Mu Lao had left him to control the spiritual soul core had already been used up. After absorbing that spiritual power, his spiritual soul core had become even stronger, and it had also bought him a great deal of precious time. Now, the ultimate ice soul core's chest had grown significantly larger. Its rotation speed had reached a level impossible to discern with the naked eye. With Mu Lao's help, even Huo Yuhao himself did not know how long he had managed to persist, but the ultimate ice soul core in his chest had at least tripled in size during this period. At this moment, although the ultimate ice soul core was still far from fully formed, it was no longer as fragile as it had been at the beginning. It had become much more solid, as though condensed from a piece of ice crystal, and its rotation was increasingly affecting the spiritual soul core. The collision between the two caused Huo Yuhao's body to tremble uncontrollably. The Snow Empress and Ice Empress displayed their formidable strength, and even now, they remained extremely stable. With the help of the Dragon Pill, Huo Yuhao's physical body had also grown much stronger, and at least for now, he could still endure. Octagonal mysterious ice grass remained motionless, while the Ice Bear King Xiaobai continued assisting Huo Yuhao, using its power to stabilize his meridians and internal organs. Mermaid Princess Leia had already temporarily rested after Mu Lao's spiritual power entered her, and she was now fully prepared to act again at any moment. Huo Yuhao had already reached a point of no return in his cultivation of the yin-yang complementary method. He knew very well that if he failed now, it would not simply end in injury. The extreme ice energy cluster in his chest had already grown quite powerful, having absorbed an amount of soul power equivalent to about 30% of his normal state. Soul power of this level was still insufficient to form a soul core, but once that highly compressed energy erupted, it would be enough to blow apart his body, which had already fused with dragon bloodline. Steadying his mind, he maintained his current state. Through this period of tempering, Huo Yuhao's mentality had become much calmer. With the help of the 6 great soul spirits and Mu Lao, if he still could not succeed, then he would have even less chance of success in the future. Therefore, no matter what, he had to persist to the end and achieve everything in one decisive attempt. The spiritual soul core spun madly. The spiritual energy Mu Lao had previously injected had temporarily slowed it down, but also provided significant nourishment. At this moment, the energy erupting from the spiritual soul core was becoming increasingly powerful, repeatedly assaulting Huo Yuhao's willpower. Under Huo Yuhao's control, the spiritual soul core released massive amounts of spiritual power. Now anything that approached the extreme ice soul core would be affected by it, instantly shattering and dispersing, only to be reabsorbed by the spiritual soul core. The more this happened, the more enraged the spiritual soul core became. How could it sit by and watch as someone seized its territory? Inside the laboratory, the temperature began to drop again. The octagonal mysterious ice grass quietly emerged from Huo Yuhao's body, its ice blue leaves radiating a gentle glow as it began to release its power. Octagonal ice origin condensation. In the air, extreme ice energy was rapidly absorbed by it, then injected into Huo Yuhao's body, directly passed on to the Snow Empress, stabilizing her power. Huo Yuhao himself could not perceive any of this. His entire attention was focused on his spiritual power. After an unknown amount of time, the intense pain and the spiritual soul core's frenzied rampage finally made him reach his limit again. The body, nourished by the dragon pill, once again began to feel that terrifying sensation of being torn apart. Mermaid Princess Leia had already begun assisting him. But at this stage, the rampaging spiritual soul core was no longer something she could suppress. She could only barely help stabilize a portion of its energy. A surge of icy blue energy swept upward at that moment. The Snow Empress ice crystal moved once again, still floating upward. The Snow Empress's spiritual aura was as cold and unyielding as Huo Yuhao's ice snow goddess's sigh, instantly striking the spiritual soul core, causing it to freeze for a brief moment, as if doused in cold water. Immediately after, the Snow Empress's transformed crystal suddenly exploded, scattering into countless threads that wrapped around Huo Yuhao's rapidly spinning extreme ice energy cluster. Snow Empress. Even though Huo Yuhao was in unbearable agony, he could still clearly sense everything she was doing. Although he did not know what kind of harm this would bring to her, he felt her unwavering determination. Snow Empress. With a hum, the extreme ice energy cluster in his chest erupted violently in a tremor, releasing surging energy fluctuations like a geyser bursting outward. Huo Yuhao only felt a sudden tightness in his chest. Immediately after, the spiritual power from the spiritual soul core that had been rushing toward his chest scattered instantly, and the pain in his body temporarily vanished. The strands of extreme ice energy from the shattered Snow Empress ice crystal were so pure, like ribbons of ice, quietly wrapping around the extreme ice energy cluster. These ice ribbons, instead of slowing its rotation, further accelerated it. In the midst of its rapid spin, the extreme ice energy cluster continuously emitted humming sounds as the energy inside was being madly compressed. An increasingly powerful sensation spread outward from Huo Yuhao's chest. In just a few breaths, the extreme ice energy cluster expanded to more than 10 times its original size. When it nearly filled his entire chest cavity, it suddenly contracted again, suppressed by a mysterious force, returning to its previous size. The color of the soul core itself changed directly, turning into a transparent deep blue. Around this translucent, spindle-shaped deep blue energy mass, a stretch of space as silent and dark as the night sky had already appeared. A soul core? Is this what a soul core looks like? At the very least, it was already a soul core that had begun to take shape. Huo Yuhao was greatly shocked. One must know that in his judgment, the previous state should have been maintained for at least 3 times as long, and it would still require an immensely vast amount of ultimate ice energy before a soul core could possibly be condensed. Yet Snow Emperor's sudden activation had directly caused the ultimate ice energy in his chest to condense into the form of a soul core. This was no longer something that could simply be described as strange. It was practically a miracle. Snow Emperor, what exactly have you done? After being briefly stalled by Snow Emperor's spiritual impact, the spiritual soul core erupted once again. This time, Huo Yuhao was unable to completely block it. An overwhelmingly powerful surge of spiritual force shot straight toward the newly formed ultimate ice soul core in his chest. That Feng Kuang's spiritual fluctuation clearly intended to eliminate the ultimate ice soul core entirely. However, at that very moment, what Huo Yuhao felt in his chest was not pain, but a wave of coolness. Just as that frenzied spiritual power was about to collide with the ultimate ice soul core, a powerful will mixed with ultimate ice energy suddenly erupted, sweeping upward in reverse. And in an instant, it froze that raging spiritual force. Yes, it froze. Even spiritual power could be frozen. Huo Yuhao was completely stunned. Strands of ribbon-like ultimate ice energy surged upward, continuously extending toward the spiritual soul core, as if launching a counterattack. What Huo Yuhao could not see was that the octagonal mysterious ice grass outside his body had reached its absolute limit after executing the octagonal ice origin condensation. It was trembling violently, every blade of grass almost transparent. Within the entire room, cold winds howled as countless ice elements crazily surged into his body. The support from the ice bear King Xiaobai to Huo Yuhao's body suddenly ceased as well. Countless tiny white energy clusters, under its control, rushed toward Huo Yuhao's ultimate ice soul core, merging with it. Ice Empress controlled the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion torso bone as droplets of emerald green liquid dripped down, continuously seeping into that ultimate ice soul core. In the name of me, the spirit of the ice and snow maiden merge. Boom! Huo Yuhao's entire body shook violently. He only felt as though his chest and entire body had exploded in that instant. In a split second, his mind went blank, his thoughts stopped, and even his will seemed to suffer unimaginable devastation, falling into emptiness together with his spiritual soul core. Stardew Forest, Core Circle, Land of Great Peril. The Lake of Life was as calm as a huge piece of green emerald. Every plant growing around it was filled with life energy. Even simply breathing here allowed one to feel that life force flooding into the body. Unfortunately, for almost all powerful beings, this place was a forbidden zone of life. Boom! A violent explosion shattered the tranquility of nature. A pitch-black figure shot up instantly from the center of the Lake of Life, lifting countless waves of water. The water turned into mist and was absorbed by the black figure, which then hovered in midair. Long hair draped down both sides of his face, and his black eyes gleamed with golden light. Yet deep within those eyes, a trace of uncertainty and shock lingered. What's going on? Why can't I sense his existence anymore? The handsome man in black muttered to himself. As the foremost powerhouse of the present age and the leader of the 10 great beasts, the beast god Tian had always been extremely confident in himself. No matter how strong humans were, no human could shake his position as the strongest on the continent. Landing on the shore, Tian's eyes revealed a thoughtful expression. He drew strange arcs in the void with his right hand, and soon a black rune materialized out of thin air. Black mist spread. A golden light flashed in Tian's eyes, but the next second, his expression turned solemn. Gone. He could no longer sense it. Why? Being awakened from his slumber meant that something of extreme importance had occurred, something related to the future of the Stardew Forest. That person's aura had disappeared. Just moments ago, he had clearly sensed that Huo Yuhao, who carried his reverse scales imprint, had suddenly vanished without leaving any trace behind. When an aura disappears, there's only one possibility: death. At least, that was what Tian believed. However, his reverse scale was not only used to monitor Huo Yuhao, but also to protect him. Once Huo Yuhao encountered danger, the reverse scale would immediately issue a warning, allowing him, as the beast god, to rescue Huo Yuhao at the first possible moment. Although Tian greatly appreciated Huo Yuhao, since it was Huo Yuhao who created the Spirit Pagoda organization and at least temporarily eased the relationship between humans and soul beasts, in his heart Huo Yuhao was ultimately just a human, an exploitable human. He could not allow Huo Yuhao to die, because within Huo Yuhao's body was the fate power of the Destiny Beast, the three-eyed golden lion. As long as Huo Yuhao lived, the aura of destiny would continue to favor the Stardew Forest. Although it was not as powerful as when the three-eyed golden lion had been present, it still had some effect. At the same time, however, he also could not allow Huo Yuhao to become too powerful. This human possessed extremely high talent. If one day he ascended to godhood, the Stardew Forest would lose that blessing of destiny. Therefore, Tian had always been closely monitoring the changes in Huo Yuhao. When Huo Yuhao truly attracted the attention of the Divine Realm, he immediately and without hesitation sealed his power, preventing him from communicating with the divine realm. As for how Huo Yuhao viewed this, that was not something he cared to consider. What could a mere human do, no matter how strong? He had already reached the limit of this world. Humans could never defeat him under any circumstances. Yet even under such conditions, Huo Yuhao's aura suddenly vanished. This completely exceeded Di Tian's understanding. Di Tian was very confident in his reverse scale. That scale was not an ordinary one. It was equivalent to his avatar. With it, he could accurately locate targets and use his mastery of spatial profound truth to transfer a part of his power there. But now, not only could he not sense Huo Yuhao's existence, he could not even feel the aura of his reverse scale. How could he not be shocked? Unable to sense the reverse scale, he also could not transmit his power to investigate Huo Yuhao's situation. No, something was definitely wrong. Di Tian narrowed his eyes. He absolutely could not allow the power of destiny to slip out of his control. Something must have happened on Huo Yuhao's side. It was likely that he had used some ability to temporarily block the connection between himself and the reverse scale, thereby making himself undetectable as well. Since he had done this, there must be a purpose. No, he had to go and see. The last location where the reverse scale had sensed Huo Yuhao was Shrek City. The worst-case scenario would be to cripple this boy and keep him forever in the Douluo forest, then find a way to extend his life. Although this might affect the power of destiny, it would still be better than losing it entirely. With a single step, Di Tian vanished into thin air. When he reappeared, he was already in the sky, thousands of meters above. With another flicker, it was as if space itself had been torn open. He stepped into the rift, which then closed, and the powerful beast god disappeared. After Shrek City's expansion, its distance from the Douluo forest had become quite short. 1 minute later, when Di Tian's black figure appeared in the sky, an ear-piercing alarm immediately rang out within Shrek City. The Tang sect's soul tools and the soul tool hall of Shrek Academy had developed rapidly. Ground-to-air detection soul tools and high-altitude detection soul tools were already in place. Although compared to the Sun-Moon Empire, they still lagged significantly in both effectiveness and quantity. The moment a person suddenly appeared in the air, Shrek City's detection soul tools immediately identified him. On the ground and city walls, numerous soul tools locked onto the black figure. Seeing that there was only one intruder, 10 soul masters from the Shrek City Defense Force immediately took to the air, rapidly moving to encircle the figure. A cold snort rang out, as if the entire sky trembled violently. The 10 figures who had just risen into the air instantly felt a terrifying force pressing down from above, forcing them back to the ground. Because they had already reached a certain height, several of them were injured from the fall. Call Huo Yuhao out. I have something to ask him, Di Tian said, hands behind his back, hovering in midair, completely ignoring all of Shrek City's defensive systems. The alarm instantly changed into a rapid, continuous siren, a signal of a powerful enemy invasion. From the direction of Shrek Academy, several figures rose into the air, led by xianxia, the dean of the martial soul department of Shrek Academy. Alongside xianxia were Xun'er, Duoluo, Kai Meyer, and Zhang Lishuan. When they saw the beast god Di Tian hovering in midair, their expressions all changed slightly. This one is quite long, so I'll translate it faithfully and fluently while preserving your glossary terms. This is not someone to be trifled with. Back then, it was only when Mu Lao and Mu Lao's spirit joined forces that they barely managed to seal him away for a period of time. In the end, it was only after he was persuaded by Huo Yuhao that he left. Otherwise, that incident would have put Shrek City in grave danger. Beast God, it has been well. May I ask what brings you to Shrek? xianxia split his hands in the air, and white flames burst forth, forming 2 enormous wings that forcibly shattered the oppressive force in the sky. He led the others up into the air, quickly reaching the same altitude as Di Tian. Di Tian glanced at him in surprise. xianxia, your strength has improved quite quickly. Indeed, the current dean of the Martial Soul Department had already reached a soul power level close to the standard Mu Lao had before becoming a limit Daw. Although he had not officially reached rank 98, he was already at the peak of rank 97. For a Super Douluo to improve this quickly had already exceeded Tion's expectations. Xianxia's martial soul was originally top tier, and with the assistance of the Heaven and Earth Creation Pill, he was able to advance so rapidly. At most, within a few months, he would reach rank 98. As for whether he could eventually break through to rank 99, that would depend on his fortune and his own comprehension. Even so, his current strength had already surpassed Elder Song, making him the strongest person in Shrek Academy apart from Mu Lao. Although Elder Song was an experienced rank 97 powerhouse, he was an agility-type battle soul master after all. In terms of martial soul foundation, he was still somewhat inferior to Xianxia. You flatter me, beast god. Compared to you, this little bit of strength of mine is nothing more than a firefly's glow. Since you have come to Shrek in such a domineering manner, could it be that you are here to help us Shrek resist foreign enemies? As he spoke, Xianxia even pointed toward the direction outside the city. Tion was momentarily stunned by his words and instinctively turned to look outside the city. Although the Sun Moon Empire's army was still 100 li away, with the beast god's eyesight, he could naturally see them clearly. His pupils could not help but contract because the human army outside Shrek City actually made him feel a sense of danger. In other words, there was something over there that could threaten him. I'm not here to help you humans. Your own affairs should be handled by yourselves. I am here to find Huo Yuhao. Tell him to come out. I have something to ask him. Tion said coldly. He would not be so easily deceived. He had no goodwill toward any humans.